Hello there. This is Apollo Detectives 4. I am Ben Emlyn-Jones, and welcome to another exciting episode in this series of films we are making to investigate the Apollo moon landings. And this is, when I say investigate, we're going to look at it from an alternative position and question what really happened on that fateful mission, and indeed series of missions. This is indeed a very, very auspicious time, because it's actually, we're coming up to the 50th anniversary of the supposed first moon landing, that is Apollo 11, a NASA mission which allegedly landed 2 men on the moon and returned them safely to Earth. That's what we've been told, but is it true? Now, several viewers have said, as a criticism of the previous videos we did, that we all agree too much. Well, actually, we don't agree on everything. In fact, we have had some disagreements in the course of this program. But what they mean is, why won't someone who actually will defend NASA come onto the show and debate with us? Well, this is not our choice. We have asked almost everyone we can think of to come on the show and do exactly that, and they have not done so. They have declined to actually engage with us in this program, which is a shame, because it's our intention to be civil and rational towards anyone who believes they can come on and disagree with us, give us a different alternative view, say that NASA are not lying. But anyway, for those of you who have not watched before, you'll be familiar with the format. This is a roundtable discussion. We have back some old friends and a new face as well. So let us begin with our new friend, our new guest. It is Trevor Weaver. Hello, Trevor.
Hi there.
Welcome to Apollo Detectives.
Yes, thank you. Nice to be here.
Now, tell us a little bit about your book that you've written, because we have discussed it on the program before.
The story about that is I thoroughly believe the whole moon landing fiasco. Yeah, there's the book, Marcus.
Mark's holding it up, yeah.
And I used to argue with my daughter. My daughter just didn't believe it. And I used to say, well, they left retro reflectors on the moon and they're being used by universities, etc. So it must be true. Anyhow, as part of that, I thought, okay, I'll do some more research and find some more evidence to convince them. Also, my son also doesn't believe. And in writing that book, of course, I came to realize that they probably did go. That book that you've just seen there is completely impartial. I don't have a view in the book. I just look at the evidence for and against. But as a result of that, of course, I realized that they didn't go. And that's what the new book is about, which is this one. This is just a mock of the book.
That's a new one that's coming out soon.
That's coming out 20th of July. Yeah.
Right. Oh, that's great. That's the date of the landings. That's a very, very good date indeed.
So, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
So, well, another familiar face you'll be familiar with is the organizer of High Wycombe Paranormal. It is Neil Geddes-Ward. Hi, Neil.
Hi, yeah, and apologies if you could just see a frozen image of me, but we've had technical problems with our Skype tonight. So my InVision camera seems to have frozen, so you can only see a frozen image of me, but I hope to be sharing some images later and maybe a bit of video. And there's a little bit of noise on some of our recordings tonight. We've had problems with microphones, but we are trying to obviously get through it as best we can. So apologies to those that are listening and think, well, you know, they can hear hiss or something on the audio. That's the problem we've got to live with, unfortunately, but I will try and address that in our edit later on. Okay. But yeah, I'm pleased to be back, and it's nice to see some new people in the show and also familiar faces from the past as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us again, Neil. It's great that your frozen image is not in a really embarrassing expression like what usually happens when an image freezes.
Wait till I start sharing.
I'm glad that still works. Now, another familiar face, someone who's been on before. I think, Marcus, you are actually our most regular contributor. I think you've been on all of them. Marcus Allen is back again for number 4. Hi, Marcus.
Hello. Very nice to be back. You just can't keep a good one down, can you?
Exactly. Yeah. So how's things going at Nexus magazine?
Oh, it's going brilliantly at the moment. Yeah, we've had that extract in the previous issue. We had the extract from Randy Walsh's book, an Apollo hoax hidden in plain sight, and we've had a follow-up letter, and even yours truly got a letter published in Nexus in this current issue.
Yeah.
Basically asking NASA to front up and stop being so stupid and get real, otherwise we'll never get back into space.
Well, exactly. Yeah, this is, as I said on previous shows, this is the 50th anniversary. It's an informational choke point where, you know, it's a put up or shut up sign for all of us, including ourselves and NASA. And finally, last but not least, we have the return of a man who's risen very early this morning because of where he is in the world. But thanks very much for his commitment. He's here. He had a few technical problems like we all have this evening. It's Jarrah White. Hi, Jarrah.
Nice to be back again.
Good to have you back, mate. How's things going with you?
Well, as you can see, I'm all dressed up like it's winter because it actually is winter down here right now. And I kid you not, it's let me put it this way. It's basically like the day of the Challenger launch. It's just absolutely freezing. Oh. I got the heaters on. I'm all dressed up and everything and stuff. And I actually dread getting out of bed in the morning because it's so cold. Oh. But that's commitment. That's
it commitment. Definitely
Thank
is.
you for joining.
I appreciate that. And it's actually really quite warm where I am. It's summer here in England.
Oh, I envy you. I envy you. You lucky bastard.
All right. Well, thanks, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. It's really great. It's really great you're here. Now, the important thing to look at, I think, is because we are, at the time we're recording, we're just a couple of weeks away from the 50th anniversary of what has been described by some as the most important moment in human history. Now, that is a pretty big statement to make. That's absolutely unequivocal about how important this is to the official story and indeed to most people's view of the universe and our place in it and our exploration of it so far. Now, NASA have been saying a few things. Indeed, there's a film out called Apollo 11. I believe, Marcus, you've seen this, haven't you? It's a documentary that's on the big screen.
Yes, I have seen it. I went to the local cinema here in Crawley and saw it on the IMAX screen, which is supposed to be this great immersive experience. And certainly there was very loud sound, and the film was very well produced. It was good Hollywood production, quick editing, lots of useful captions on it telling you how fast the craft was going, and very, very crude and not very representative illustrations of the lunar module landing on the moon. I mean, not landing on the moon, because obviously that wasn't shown, but they were just showing how it supposedly happened. Now, there were various points I looked out for, and ironically, the very first word that appeared in the film after the certificate, which appears at the beginning of most films, the very first word that appeared on the Apollo 11 documentary, they called it, was the word believe.
I see.
Now, I've seen They Live, and if you've seen the film, John Carpenter's film They Live from
excellent film
30 years ago, you'll understand what I'm getting at, because we were told to believe what we're being shown. Now, it was all original footage, we're told. There was some found footage, which implies that it hadn't been previously seen, though virtually every single scene that I watched I had seen previously. And so quite what it was they were trying to persuade us was happening, I don't know, because the astronauts, this is Apollo 11, the last time we saw them on Earth was as they got into their little van to go to the rocket to go up to the moon, we're told. The next time we see them, other than a few grainy shots, ironically, 130,000 miles out was the actual commentary at the time. And if I hadn't known better, I'd have said it was Bart's film, What Happened on the Moon. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon, because they were showing exactly the same shot of the Earth, supposedly 130,000 miles out. It's as if they hadn't been watching some of the descriptions that were being shown by Bart in his 2000 film. Then we get the next picture is of the Apollo 11 astronauts allegedly on the lunar surface, and we see the data acquisition camera, which is a 16mm film camera, filming at 1 frame per second of all the time they're on the moon. So we see them moving around very vaguely. And we see the magazine 40 photographs, which you're all very familiar with. And then they come back, and we just see them splashed down in the Pacific and greeted by President Nixon on the USS Hornet. It was, in my view, it was a piece of propaganda. It was a very good piece of propaganda. We were meant to believe what we were being shown.
Yeah. It's we had to expect this. I mean, this is, I think, it looks as if the official story is they're clinging onto it. They're doubling down, and so this, of course, is always. This was always going to happen as we approach the 50th anniversary. Is this film reached Australia, Jarrah?
I don't think it's reached Australia yet. I haven't seen it advertised on the television or anything like that. Although, just as a matter of fact, just last night I was watching ABC News 24. They brought up they're going to be making what's it called, the Stargazing Night. I forget the name of the program, but they have Stargazing Night with Brian Cox and a few other people.
Oh.
They're starting starting July 16. They're going to be appropriately July 16. They're going to be making a whole series of it, specials basically dedicated to the anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission, and of course touching on future planned missions and stuff like that. I haven't seen it. It hasn't aired yet, but that's what they've got. As a matter of fact, while I was watching the news as well, I noticed there was it's funny Mark, you should mention the stuff about the footage that they're supposedly dug up for this new Apollo 11 film. I was watching the news last night, and they mentioned there was this 3 reels of Apollo 11 footage that are going on auction on July 20th. And I think it was I've actually got the website up here, auction in New York City. A fellow apparently purchased a whole bunch of reels off NASA, to sell off to television production companies for taping over. These were 2-inch quadruplex tapes. And, well, he found 3 of them were labeled Apollo 11, and he says that these are the first generation, the only surviving first generation footage. If you recall the way the footage was sent to the networks, the Apollo 11 was supposedly the slow scan TV picture, and so we have to convert it from 10 frames per second to 30 frames per second. So we'll have it recorded off the TV screens, and they'll go sent to the production, so sent to the television networks and the like. Well, the unfiltered films were recorded on 1-inch tape, which, and of course they had at least 2 machines running at the same time. These 1-inch reels only recorded about 15 minutes at a time. And so I'm a bit skeptical that these are indeed the original first generation recordings, because as best I can recall, they only used 2-inch tape for archiving the second generation footage, the slow scan converted footage. So if they were using 2-inch tapes to record the unfiltered footage as well, I was not aware of that, but I can't find any documentation about that.
So to clarify, these tapes are up for auction. Are they actually direct? Are they recorded directly off the NASA feed, or are they the ones that the networks film from the screen with cameras?
Well, the person who's auctioning them, he claims that they're the first generation footage, the footage that was not degraded or converted or anything like that. What they did was I'm actually looking at the converted machine right now.
It should be much better quality then. I mean, it should be important for historical purposes. You'd think it would be maybe someone would get it on eminent domain.
I'd be interested to see what the footage is as well and stuff, because to the best of my knowledge, all the original unfiltered tapes were all taped over. You see, as I was saying before, you see they had the degraded quality footage and stuff, and then they had the boxes and boxes of 1-inch tape which recorded this unfiltered, undegraded footage. And those conveniently went missing, and then was later discovered they were erased, taped over and stuff. Well, how do you erase boxes and boxes? There's going to be a few thousand reels there. In fact, I'm actually looking at the machines that they used right now. There's another thing too. If I can get the footage up here, let me just try to screen share this. Hang on. Yeah,
and we can edit in afterwards if not, if it's a problem. But it's the actual loss of this classic, this really historical, as I said, it's been described as the most important event in history. The idea that someone will, I Love Lucy, let's just put I Love Lucy on it or something, and it's not. Surely someone would have put these things aside and kept them a special. I mean, this is something that I thought the moment someone said, "Oh, we've lost a couple of tapes. Oh, we've reused a couple of tapes," and I thought to myself, "This doesn't make sense. It really doesn't."
I'm trying to find the screen share button here. Hang on.
Okay. Right. So I see there's a screen that's come up. There's a separate screen that's come up now.
Right, let me try this one.
But it's like
here's the actual one of the reels. Can you see my screen?
I can only see your face at the moment. But you did put up an inset in a minute ago.
All right. Well, the footage the footage that's up for auction and stuff. There's a label on it right now. It says Apollo 11 EVA, July 20, 1969, reel 3. This one says
I see
VR.
I see a picture.
Yeah, this one says VR 2000, 525 high band, 15 IPS. IPS refers to inches per second, right. And the VR 2000 refers to the actual video recording device. Which
I think you posted a link in the emails a little while ago, actually.
That's correct. Yeah, and actually, here's Bill Wood's article. Bill Wood was one of the engineers at the Goldstone station. Here he's talking about the devices that they use for recording, and well, he says down here where is he says. The output of the basically he's talking about here the unconverted Apollo slow scan television signals were recorded on the wideband analog tape, blah blah blah. They used either the Mincom M22 or the Ampex FR 1400 analog recorders at 120 inches per second. So obviously they use a completely different recorder to record the unfiltered tapes, which leads me to suspect that this is actually a second generation.
Is this from Sydney Morning Herald? Is it the
this one is the one I'm looking at right now is the Fox News one.
Okay, right. Okay. No, but it's clear that it's really strange how these things have got lost. It's really a weird thing. Here we go. I see it. Right, Fox News. It's odd how these things are just these.
Here we go. I start sharing it now.
Yeah. So where have they been all this time before this person who's obviously does he or she must own them? Oh, let me just get
he purchased a whole load of tapes. Apparently, he sold most of them to. These were not all of them were necessarily the Apollo footage. Some may have been from the shuttle. Some, or maybe not the shuttle because he bought them in the 70s. So some might have been from Skylab or from ASTP or who knows. But basically, he was selling them off at about $50 a piece to various production companies. Because tape was expensive in those days. People would just record over them and everything. But apparently, when he realized three of them were from Apollo 11, he hung on to them, because he figured they might have some monetary value down the road. Obviously, they were, because now he's going to be auctioning them for about $1 million or so.
I'm surprised he's the only one who thought of that. I mean, this is very odd. I mean, Trevor, what do you think about? Trevor, hello. What do you think about this? Have you heard about this story?
Yes, I read it from Jarrah's email today. I mean, it was 1976 that he bought them. It's a very strange story that he would particularly hold on to those 3 boxes and presumably sell the rest of them. I just find it very strange.
Yeah,
you see where I'm pointing on the screen. You can see this says the VR 2000 and 15 inches per second. Well, obviously there's a 2-inch tape as well. That's not what they used for recording the unfiltered footage. Here it says the unconverted Apollo slow scan television signals. Here we go. Ampex FR 1400, 120 inches per second. So that leads me to suspect it's second generation, not the unfiltered stuff that they're talking about.
Right. So obviously, if he's selling these stuff under false pretenses,
I don't think he's selling them under false pretenses. He probably just is misinformed.
Yeah. Can you see me, guys? Because I can't. Is my camera working? Can you see me?
No.
Right. Okay.
I can't see you, Ben. I can only see your icon.
Right. There we go. Have I had my camera off the whole time? Have I had my camera off the whole time?
I was going to mention. I forgot to.
All right. No worries. So you can. Well, I'm here now. Yeah. So that's just. This is one of the many strange things to do. These strange anomalies that seem to appear when you think, well, if what NASA are saying are true, things would have been different. And this is one of many of those. And of course, at the moment, NASA are going to try to put in kind of pseudo explanations for these things. And it's possible this news story is one of those, because people look at this and they'll think, well, come on, they're selling tapes. It's in a sense, this is like a solid thing which attaches value, a very valuable solid thing that he's selling for a lot of money, which is connected to this historical event. I mean, you wouldn't, if someone turned up with Christopher Columbus telescope, for example, it would immediately lend gravitas to the man himself and his mission. And I think we may be looking at something similar. What do you reckon, Neil? What do you reckon to that?
Sorry, just unmuting my mic there. Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff going around. Obviously, at this time, they're passing lots of information backwards and forwards, and so anything that seems to be remotely connected with Apollo, they'll put it in their web feeds and things like that. It's interesting that it was pointed out by Jarrah there that I think it was the machine that this tape was recorded on. Now, I've worked with 1-inch tape because I have a background in broadcasting, and so I mean now it's all digital files and things like that. But you know, during the mid 1980s, when I was doing 1-inch tape recording, I'd been on courses actually for what they call quad recording, not actually learning how to do quad recording. I was just showing it as a matter of historical interest, being shown what a quad machine was like. They were very, very noisy and huge, apparently. But you'd always have what they call a record sheet with each video reel, and you'd write down which video machine you'd recorded it on, simply because it was a way of identifying if there's any technical problems with a recording. It might show an error in the actual machine that could then be identified by engineers to then go investigate and clean it or repair it or whatever might be the case point. So it's interesting just as a kind of technical thing that it said about the type of machine that it was recorded on as well. And also that tells the other engineers or whoever's going to acquire the tape later on that it may be only be played back most successfully on the same kind of duplicate machine, Ampex or whatever the machine was quoted and things like
Ampex,
that.
VR 2000 on the label, that's what it says.
Yeah, yeah. I've worked with Ampex and I've worked with Sony and I've worked with RCA. I remember most about the Sony and the RCA, I think, but Ampex tape is was the big stuff going around at the time.
That was the industry standard in the 60s and the 50s.
Yeah, it was very, very expensive, the tape, and the heads alone on these VCR machines were in the region in the 1980s. One would cost at least £50,000, just the head alone on these machines. So they're very, very expensive, and the tape was always expensive to boot as well. But yeah, very interesting. I'm ready whenever you want, Ben, by the way, to share my kind of dual presentation, if you like, of some of Scott's stuff and some of my stuff, but I'll do that whenever you
yeah,
ask.
Sure. I just wanted to, we'll go into that right now in a minute, Neil. I just wanted to conclude by saying that this seems to be very coincidental, an interesting coincidence that these items have come on sale at the very time that NASA most needs people to believe that their story is true, because people are really going to be focusing on the Apollo moon missions during this month. And as it happens, we have something which gives, I think, it has a psychological effect. It's something tangible, which focuses people on an event which, including this particular item, which is in the world. It's there. It's people who've seen the news story. So I'm suspicious about how that happened. I'm suspicious about how it suddenly emerged. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if this was timed particularly for this particular month. I don't know if you gentlemen agree, but that's my suspicion.
It's very strange that so much of this stuff is appearing at auction.
Yeah.
You think that this is historical evidence for the greatest achievement in human history, and it's appearing in auction. What is going on? And that's not the only stuff that's disappearing out of NASA's tight grasp of its evidence. Many of the Apollo guidance computers are appearing in scrap metal merchants.
I think Hunchback did a video about that, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. And the original lunar rover, with a photograph of Werner von Braun driving it, appeared in a scrap metal merchant as well. In fact, Trevor has much of this in his new book. It's a terrible story that NASA appears to be trying to get rid of all the evidence that it's managed to accumulate as quickly as possible. It's unfortunate they're doing it at the 50th anniversary because people are starting to take notice. But it's absolutely outrageous.
Again, it's like not a coincidence.
No, it's not a coincidence. And it's outrageous that NASA consider it's acceptable to do it. So,
Crazy.
What sort of people do they employ that is just going to chuck stuff out? Because appearing at a scrap metal merchants, fortunately one or two people have got bright enough eyes to be able to see what they are and have rescued them.
It's extraordinary.
That actually reminds me of one story that I actually remembered reading about quite a few years ago. As you may know, before the Apollo missions, we had the unmanned lunar orbiter probes, which are specifically intended for photographing the lunar surface down to 1 meter resolution. Specifically, so they know what the lunar soil would look like in advance. How they basically, people ask, oh well, how do they get the landscape to match up between these post-Apollo photos? Well, you're showing your ignorance of pre-Apollo photography there. So they have these cameras specifically for that purpose. But they had the films that they released to the public. Those were actually shot off TV screens. And the official story for that was they didn't want to let the Soviets know just how capable their resolving capabilities of their cameras were. But all the original unfiltered tapes, they were in this old abandoned McDonald's restaurant, which they actually had used as a storage facility. They called it McMoon's, as a matter of fact. And basically, this lady apparently was working for NASA. She was told, okay, we'll just reuse this stuff for the space shuttle missions. She thought, are you crazy? You out of your mind? This is valuable stuff here. I thought she literally hang on to all this stuff, and now there's actually a website purely dedicated to digitally archiving all these unfiltered lunar orbiter photos. And you see the quality of those; it's absolutely astounding. And this is unmanned stuff. This is the unmanned precursor, for the Apollo missions. People ask me, well, I asked them. They said, you think that Apollo discovered all this stuff? Even if Apollo was real, and if you had to pay for the stuff, what would you do? Would you send somebody to the moon and hope that the place they're going to land in is safe to touch down on, or would you want to map the place in advance to see what it looks like? To see, this is safe. Yeah, exactly.
In fact, there's an interesting little side story on this. Well, it's actually quite an important side story on the lunar orbiter, not the lunar reconnaissance orbiter. That came in 2009. The lunar orbiter, which was sent to the moon 66, 67 to photograph allegedly landing sites.
They sent 5 of them.
Yeah, there were 5 lunar orbiters. The photographs that were taken, because they were photographs, they were not digital transmissions. These were actually filmed, and the film was developed on the orbiter itself and then transmitted back to Earth. The point about that is that the cameras that took those photographs on the lunar orbiter had to be enclosed in a pressurized environment, pressurized to 1.5 pound per square inch, which is 0.1 bar for those technical geeks who look into these things. The point about that is that in order to have photographic film survive in the vacuum of space, Tor 10 to the minus 11 on the moon, I mean, we're talking severe vacuum. In order for the film to survive, it has to be kept under pressure, albeit a small pressure. That particular technology was developed for the Hexagon spy satellite, which orbited late 1960s. And that was also using a pressurized environment for the film. So the idea that photographic film can survive unpressurized on the moon is a fairy tale, which destroys the whole photographic record of Apollo on the moon, because the Hasselblad cameras were not pressurized, nor were the data acquisition cameras pressurized.
So for
I think it's also important, and I think it's also important to note as well, is that the film they used on lunar orbiter, I forget what it's called right now, but it was actually a specially designed film that was, built to withstand the radiation, or rather survive it without being significantly deteriorated from it.
Yes, it was, but it's the emulsion on the film surface itself, which starts life as a liquid, which is seriously affected by the vacuum of space. And that is the key point, because following the Hexagon spy satellite, what we've got now are digital satellites. Is not affected in the same way. It records light quite differently.
It's because all this time has gone past, and of course, anyone significantly younger than me is probably going, "Film, what's that?" And I'll say, "Yeah, I do remember the times when you actually had like these long thin bits of plastic you put into a camera, and that's how you produce the picture. You didn't just click them and put them on Facebook." But
most kids these days haven't even seen VHS.
I know. I just say, imagine Netflix in a black plastic brick. Got it, kids? Yeah. But
hi, kids. Welcome to the 80s.
I know, it's incredible. This is just, it's an illustration of how times changed since this amazing event happened, and we've lost the original medium on which it was produced is gone. And it's like, maybe it's a sign of the times, but I sometimes think if someone threw the Mona Lisa out of the Louvre Museum at some point, a number of people just shrug their shoulders and say, oh, well, so what? We got the prints, we got posters, we got mouse mats, we got mugs, and things like that. No, you don't get rid of the original medium. The original medium is essential, not just for sentimental purposes, but it's a vital historical document.
Look, I actually have a little business of actually, cleaning and archiving VHS tapes and transferring them to DVD. Even though I do the transfers, I make digital backups, send them to the clients and stuff. I always make sure to, keep the original tapes and send them to them. Because people, they want the original tapes back, just in case anything goes wrong, if they want to, I don't know, display it, or if they got friends who still have VCRs or whatever. In 2019, that's unusual, yes. But, people, they always want the original tapes back.
Of course, yeah. So, Trevor, do you cover this subject in your book, either of your books?
Which subject exactly?
The subject of the film and the videotapes and the transmissions.
Oh, yeah, extensively, yeah. I've also covered it again in the new book. It's called Diminished Technology. I can't remember in the original book which chapter it was, but it's covered quite extensively.
Well, we want to come on to your book later on as well, because I know it's an important book that we've got to read. But we're going to move on now, because Neil has. We were talking earlier. Sorry, Trevor, carry on.
It's the chapter 18, Gone but Not Forgotten.
Right, you are. That's interesting. We'll talk more about your book in a minute. Let's Marcus and Jarrah were talking about the vacuum space now and the spy satellites and things like that. But Neil, I think you've got a presentation you want to discuss more on vacuum pressures and things like that.
Now I've just got to find this thing. Where is it? How do we get to sharing again? Gosh, is that the
share screen? It says so at the bottom. Sorry.
I can see the. Is that it there?
Yeah,
I saw it. There it is. Share screen. Here we go.
Two little squares, one close to the other.
There we go. Share screen and sounds. Can you hear me? And
I can see. I can see you share the screen. Yep, I see it.
Right. Let me just bring up this document. So, okay. So if I go back to the very top, you can see that, can you?
Yes.
Jolly good. Okay. So this is basically a kind of joint presentation, if you like, between me and Scott. Scott Henderson, who joined us in our previous few recordings. He's been looking into spacesuits. He did cover this in, I think it was the last episode we did, actually, episode 3. And so he's kind of representing it here slightly. So I hope I do him justice. But I've also got a slight kind of appendum to that, which kind of ties it up quite nicely. So he's saying this is Neil Armstrong's suit as displayed by NASA as his complete kit. It says the suit flown in Apollo 11 for the claimed moon landings. It has been on display for many years and has been restored and cleaned in an attempt to keep it from decay as a permanent record of the claimed event. So we'll probably see that in an auction soon then. The International Latex Corporation, they make bras, was contracted to make the suits. NASA's updated files claim that there's 21 layers of protection, and Scott says, but none are for radiation, however. So if we just go to our next, this one gets to the next section.
They actually admitted that it wasn't good for radiation when that the solar flare NOAA 720 exploded.
Oh, really?
I remember there's a book, Seating Up for Space by Lloyd Malin, which was written based on all the technical information about the spacesuits. He wrote that I think he says that this spacesuit is designed to protect you against the harmful radiations and whatnot. Well, then NOAA 720, the big solar flare in 2003, comes along, and they published an article on Science at NASA which said that a spacesuit would have offered little protection against this.
Well, this is this is one of the reasons I do regular space weather reports for my own radio show, because this is, I think, Mary Bennett and David Percy put it very well in their documentary. They say this is a Russian solar flare roulette. The Apollo missions took place during the solar maximum, whereas I know at the moment we're actually at the nadir of the solar minimum, and there's hardly any solar flares at all. So I would have waited 4 or 5 years then done the mission, simply or done it earlier, because in the middle of the solar maximum, there's flares going off all the time, and these are very, very high intensity radiations, X-rays, gamma rays, things like that. So the Van Allen belt thing about it's only beta particles and things wouldn't count, and of course it's all on live TV, as Marcus has said several times. It's all on live TV.
No, but I got the actual flare numbers there. Renee actually published a whole. I'm not sure if you can see my screen, but obviously it's really tiny and stuff. But it basically had plugged in all these numbers, which are from NOAA's archives. Basically, how much? Actually, let's see if you can see it now. These are all the flares that occurred between 1967 and 1991, and he found that about 1,400 of them occurred during the Apollo missions. And I managed to find at least one of the flares listed in, some of the flares have the actual proton fluence data listed. Basically, that tells you how many protons per square centimeter there are per the event, per flare. And in the case of Apollo 16, the dose, I did the calculations, the doses from 10 MeV and 30 MeV protons would have been about 11 rads, which is much higher than what NASA claims they got.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, one thing we got to remember, of course, on this is that NASA tell us that they went through these belts so fast that it was just like having an X-ray, and it didn't affect them at all.
They didn't know how big or They didn't know how big or intense these belts were. I mean, they hadn't actually measured them during the solar maximum before.
Yeah, I was being sarcastic, by the way.
Of course, Marcus.
The belts, the industry standard model that we have for the belts is the AP8 max and min data, which is based on satellite observations between the 60s and the 70s. People, they get surprised whenever there's a gigantic solar flare. In fact, I remember which satellite was it? It was CRESS. The CRESS satellite detected this enormous flare. One of the things that solar flares can do is they can actually over-replenish the Van Allen radiation belts. And in fact, sometimes it will create a third radiation belt or even plug up the gap between the two belts. The CRESS flare, the CRESS satellite detected this massive influx to the Van Allen belts. This was in 1991, I believe, if I recall correctly. And I remember distinctly what was reported. They said that this particular region hasn't been well patrolled or measured since the 60s. Which just goes to show, that they just assume that we'll go whatever the AP8 max data says, it must be the true. And now there's actually correction factors that people can use to try to, account for any shortcomings these models have.
So, I mean,
the big giveaway for me is that Apollo 8 was the first mission that went outside the magnetosphere. Now, if you look at the voice transcript, you would have expected them to make some comment. How are you feeling, guys? What's your radiation level? There's no mention of this at all. Now, surely for the first time that man went out through the Van Allen belts, then they would have mentioned it and asked them how they were feeling. Presumably, they could have turned them back if the radiation was too excessive.
Well, Marcus and I discussed this, actually.
Borman actually, I was just going to say, Borman actually claims in his book Countdown that I look at my dosimeter on the way out there. Oh, it's minuscule. It's okay. That's what he claims in his book. And in fact, when Borman, he actually got motion sickness, he started chugging up, and Van Allen, he was actually mortified. He thought they was dying from the radiation exposure. And it's funny that Trevor, you should mention did you check it or not? Because I remember on the very next mission, I was actually going through the archives that I have when I was producing my Radiation Reloaded film. This is actually included in the film. It's kind of funny. The Capcom radios, this is on Apollo 10, he says, "Did you get a chance to get the radiation survey meter out?" And Cernan responds, "Yeah, I did, Charlie, and I read 0 on every scale."
It's amazing. I mean, first of all, based on what Jarrah just said, I mean, I know that the work was done much later, mostly by the Russians, but I mean, throwing up in zero gravity, I know is actually quite dangerous. You could very easily suffocate in zero gravity if you get a bit of nausea. So you need immediately urgent medical treatment if you actually have any nausea and you risk throwing up. But also, I mean,
the thing is, there's no duty of care by Houston. I mean, it would have been mentioned. It's unbelievable it wasn't mentioned.
of course, I mean, listen, I mean, the excuse for that the work wasn't done yet, but yeah, well, of course, but then they're taking a huge risk. You're not putting astronauts up in space for long orbital periods before you send them out of the Earth's magnetosphere to orbit the moon. Now, this is, as Marcus and I discussed on her Panwo Radio, this was only one mission after there was a major failure. And also the whole, as we were saying, Marcus, you know, this is a damn publicity stunt. This is why on Christmas Day, what do you do on a Christian nation? You read from the Bible, which is what they did. So rather than sending back radiation data, they were just sitting there reading from the book of Genesis, which is what you would do if you were appealing to the public rather than actually launching a real scientific mission.
Yeah, highly unscientific, and I think NASA was sued for that by. Yeah, you're muffled out a bit, Jarrah.
But broke up a bit, Jarrah.
Yeah, is the Skype
It
going?
was sued by somebody.
Yeah, it's interesting, Neil. That
I said.
Well, Jarrah, we're losing you a little bit, mate. Sorry.
Hello?
Yeah. Neil, it's interesting that you mentioned the discussions you were having online with somebody who was challenging the radiation information that we put out in the previous Apollo detectors.
Yes.
And he seemed to be saying that we didn't know what we were talking about. But,
yeah.
I mean, it's a normal response from these people that they will criticize you for what you say, but they won't then provide the correct information, or they consider correct information, to put it into perspective.
Well, let me ask him this then. Where's your mathematical data? I presented data. This is not some numbers pulled out of the sky. This is numbers from the AP8 Max. I use the correction factors, to account for the AP8 shortcomings, and I use the correct radiation weight factors, or Q factors, which are comparable, appropriate for solar flare protons, like the protons that are trapped in the Van Allen belts. And I got the data from the astronautical engineering. I got the book right here, as a matter of fact, Astronautical Engineering and Science, which shows that the shooting on Apollo would not have attenuated anything greater than 8 megaelectron-volt protons. So this is the actual data.
They put something in the comments of our last video. I can send it out to you guys later. But yeah, that was the person I invited to take part in our discussion. And they thought we were going to do a ring through or something, or he could ring through. But I said, no, we don't do it like that as such. You'd have to take part on Skype, which he didn't really have an idea of how to use, which I thought was quite funny. He knew all about the radiation, but didn't use Skype.
Before we get back to this spacesuit presentation, I found the quote from Mallon that I was referring to. He says, the thermal meteoroid gun that's part of the suit assembly also shielded them against those high-energy nuclear and electromagnetic particles that speed throughout the universe and would have a deadly effect when they strike human tissue if there was no atmosphere to slow them down and stop them. That's Lloyd Mallon's quote from his Suiting Up for Space, which was this very comprehensive book on American spacesuits. Based on all the data. It's
interesting, like of course, like we know that the radiation in space is so powerful that it affects the Earth, even but like inside our magnetosphere, inside our ionosphere, inside our atmosphere. So if you're out there without that protection, you're going to be in serious trouble. And these suits, well, they are like. We're looking at a picture now, Neil. What's this? This is zips.
This is what Scott Henderson has highlighted. So this is his research, and I've coupled it with something that I also showed Scott. I think it was last year or earlier this year, with some footage I found of James Burke, former BBC TV presenter of Tomorrow's World, actually wearing a spacesuit and then being defrocked, if you like, by 2 NASA technicians, which is very, very interesting. I'll show you that in a second.
Yeah, he has to be basically. Well, I won't have a look at it, but I mean, basically, he looks like someone being forced in and out of a straitjacket.
Yeah, essentially it was. So it says here, this suit is done up using zippers, poppers, and Velcro. This would not seal the zipper. The zipper does not go all the way up, would not hold even a small amount of pressure. Again, these suits were designed to put on and off easily for simulation purposes and media events only. This is not a pressure suit. This is not a pressure suit inside. You can see zippers and poppers there. Now, that looks very much like the one that the Tomorrow's World guy was wearing. Now, this is the latest version of the spacesuit as presented by NASA. historically, I should say, this is what they say that they wore under them, now includes the hardware incorporated into the other suit in an attempt to explain why the suit did not expand under pressure. With $52 million a day, the best NASA could come up with is a sketch on the left, which shows an astronaut with the outer suit, as you can see, and inside you can see something that looks like a kind of rubber ringed kind of suit, which is again shown on the right. Looks like Gene Cernan there, possibly wearing a form of that, which is looks something like a sci-fi movie there. But
that's the inner pressure part of the suit.
Yeah, and they're kind of claiming that was inside it.
A bladder layer, don't they?
Sorry, what's that, Trevor?
They call it a bladder layer.
A bladder. That's what. Yeah, that's the word that was being used. Yeah.
They say this is why the suit doesn't look as though it's inflated, because it's the actual bladder inside that's inflated, and not the suit.
Yeah.
So they say zips are okay and poppers and Velcro is fine because it's the bladder layer that's holding the pressure.
Yeah, and so this is the part where you connect the helmet up there, and it said it's clear to see that the suit in the previous frame is not incorporated into this suit. This is a costume for simulation only. It does not have the seals required to be pressurized. On the top of the left ring is not sealed to the suit, and the zipper does not go all the way up, and the zipper would not seal and hold any pressure anyway. The seals and connection of the helmet and gloves do not compress and have a door latch tongue design for a quick attachment. Now,
so this is a mock-up. This isn't a real suit.
Well, they're saying it's a real suit, but then there's errors in the, as Scott would call, errors in the simulation. He's talking here about the gloves on Buzz Aldrin as he's coming down the ladder. It says the images here are from Buzz descending the ladder from the Apollo simulation photo, which he quotes, and it's very clear that the gloves are not attached and, of course, cannot be in a vacuum. So he thinks that under the glove there, he thinks that the rings are not actually connecting together.
He also says that the actual vacuum on the moon would be very different to any that could be artificially created on Earth or any in like Earth orbit, for example. Scott's been saying that the vacuum's much harder, and so you double the problem.
He's saying that these. Go on, Jarrah.
I was just going to say there's actually two ways of simulating a vacuum in a suit. One is obviously to put them in a big vacuum chamber and lower the pressure. And another way, pressure on the outside of the suit, I should say. And the other way, of course, is simply to pump up the suit full of air so that it's above atmospheric pressure. If I recall correctly,
it's a pressure difference.
The suits that they had on, if I recall correctly, on Mercury and not Mercury, sorry, on Gemini, the suit pressure was up something like 3.7, and on Apollo it was 5.2 at maximum, I believe. And the shuttle suits, I believe they use 4 something psi.
Okay, so if you look on the left here, there's these kind of metal contraptions, cutaways, and it says on the left are examples of seals used to contain a vacuum. The seals need to be compressed in ultra high vacuums. The seals are made of metal and one-time use only. In other words, once they're done up, that's it. You can't use them again and unscrew them. On the right is Neil Armstrong's glove, and the connection that holds the glove to the suit are just like the door latch that pushes out into a channel. They do not compress the seal between the metal. The design is for easier way of putting the suit on and off during practices and, of course, simulations. The connection would not even hold a small amount of pressure. Now, here he's talking about, and we did talk about this briefly in the last thing, he's saying here that the top ring doesn't connect to the actual glove ring. I'm not 100% certain on that myself, but, it's there for anyone that wants to look at that further. But what I'll do, I'll press onto this section again, because here we're going to see now a demonstration of James Burke, tomorrow's world presenter, actually being defrocked in a NASA suit. And you won't see any evidence of this inner bladder suit. Okay, so just watch this. Okay. Should play, he says. Oh, don't say. Here we go.
When the first American astronaut steps out onto the surface
okay,
of the moon,
can't hear him. Can you hear him?
I can't hear it, but I've seen this video before, and I know what he says.
Okay. All right.
There's a YouTube version if you want to use that.
I've watched this before.
Okay. For those that, sorry, apologies, I can actually vaguely hear him. That's the weird thing. He's actually speaking through his visor there on the microphone. I won't interrupt this because I'll probably screw up the presentation. But he's going to be defrocked in a second by some NASA technicians. So this would be about 1968, maybe. I'm not sure the actual year.
I think this was 69 because he actually
69.
referred to he referred to Rusty Schweikart's spacewalk, which was
okay.
I think was what, March of that year. I think.
Yeah.
He also says that this is what the astronauts will wear when they go to the moon.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. BBC's coverage of the Apollo missions.
Tomorrow as well, for those that don't know, was a very popular TV series that ran from the mid-60s up until about 2004 or 5. Different presenters over the years, but the guy there is James Burke, and he was present for all the Apollo missions and was like basically the BBC's correspondent for them during that time. So here he is, being defrocked by some NASA technicians. You can take a look at the gloves there for those that want to sort of see the connectors. They're zooming in on them.
It's obviously a pretty awkward thing, and I mean the astronauts have to do this apparently in the main cabin.
He was saying actually in the video that he says that a trained astronaut with practice can get in and out of these suits in about 5 minutes, and presumably like that's in 0G by themselves, or maybe a little bit of assistance by their colleague in space. But wait till you see the very end sequence where he's really got to squeeze out of this thing. So it's quite shocking, really.
It's also interesting to note the actual volume in the lunar module that they had to get in and out of these suits. It measured 6 foot wide, 7 foot high, and 3.5 foot deep. That was the only space they had for 2 people. Now that is about the same size as the inside of an average car. And I don't know if you've ever tried changing trousers inside a car. It's not very easy. So putting a spacesuit on and making sure that you've got them all the connectors done right, because if you haven't, you're dead.
Yeah.
They actually seem to have taken that kind of into consideration when they had the pressurized rover supposedly they were going to use for the Constellation program. The actual backpack was simply literally a door to the suit was outside.
Oh yes, yeah, they step through.
Open up the backpack, step into that, and close the thing up behind you. So there you go. You get the spacesuit.
So this spacesuit, so it's a lot. It has a lot of openings. It's quite a complicated thing. Quite a lot of things that have to be shut and sealed.
Yeah.
So so there's a lot of sort of holes which you have to poke in and out. So as you they've seen in the old war films, when they had these old submarines, when they said dive, they had to shut all the diesel intakes and the exhaust things and the exhaust vents and things like that. If they didn't, then water would come in. Of course, if it's a modern nuclear-powered submarine, it doesn't have these holes in leading to the outside, so they're a lot safer. But and of course, it doesn't any kind of depressurization. I mean, this is literally life and death. I mean, we've just had it wouldn't have to be complete depressurization. We've just had a news story in this country about it's a coroner's case about a man who thought it'd be fun to ride in an airliner by sitting in the seat in the wheel arch, which of course is unheated and unpressurized. And of course, the height that commercial airliners fly, which is 40,000 feet, once you get that high, the air is too thin to breathe. So this man very quickly suffocated when the aircraft reached altitude.
You will
just watch this. Watch him try and get out. This is being assisted, right? And they're really, really struggling to pull this over his head. Like you said, straight jacket. It's like a Houdini escape kind of video, really, isn't it?
Frame rate's a bit off.
But now, how would you get that off if you're wearing this inner bladder anyway, which has got all these rubber rings which would stick like hell? And there he is, just wearing one of these kind of long john type devices, which has a few rings on. And he says, and basically, this is what he says, and basically, that is the suit. That is a suit, and this is the inner section, which he's wearing there with those tubes sticking out for cooling. So,
and they would have water running through them, so they're a lot more rigid. Rigid.
This, if it was the case that they had these inner bladder suits, as displayed in that illustration, we should be seeing him now getting out of that. But there's no evidence whatsoever of James Burke wearing that whatsoever. He doesn't even mention it. Because he actually says basically it's that suit and that suit, like this one here. So
I think the outer layer and the pressure layer are supposed to be integrated to each other.
Yeah. but it doesn't bear any resemblance to what these NASA illustrations are now coming out to now. So basically, he just gets into a shower and that's it, sort of thing.
This is totally different to what it would mean putting this on the moon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally different.
Absolutely.
Especially, like I say, when your life's at stake and getting every single seal has to be perfect.
And now, I'm talking to seals. This is just a quick thing about. I don't know if you can hear a little bit of that at all. Can you hear that at all?
No.
Okay. I'd probably have to abandon our sounds on the moon. This is him doing a stamp on the moon. Now he's actually franking a postcard, and there it is. And you see, he pulled it off there. He pulled it off, but it sort of had caused a suction as he pulled that stamp off, which suggests to me thinking, how can you get a suction as you're pulling an ink stamp off a frank letter? Because there'd be no air to cause that suction. But that's what it looked like.
Yeah, and how come the ink hasn't evaporated in the vacuum of space?
Yeah.
Which it should have done.
They claim it's a special stamp designed for the moon, but they don't exactly explain the technical know-hows of what it is and why that is, what makes it a special moon stamp.
Well, you'd think some space geek would have wanted to know, because they may want to put a bottle of that ink, they want to write letters to their friend and said, space ink, guys.
Exactly.
Things like that.
Yeah, space ink. Yeah, it should be a marketable thing. But that's it. I would love to show the stuff on the moon. Unfortunately, the sounds on the moon, but I can't seem to get my audio working. Let's see if I can.
Well, we have discussed on the previous show the hammering and about how.
Yeah, it'd be great to show it.
Just
wonder if I turn it up a little bit. Maybe if I turn up the volume of my. Let's try this. This might help. Let's try that.
You see, the vibration of my voice box makes the air vibrate between us. Then when the air vibrates your eardrum, you hear what I'm saying. But maybe you've seen a demonstration of a bell under a glass jar. With normal air inside the jar, you could hear the bell clearly. But when the vacuum pump drew the air out of the jar, there was nothing inside to carry the vibrations of the bell. Nothing until the air was let back into the jar.
Photo numbers. And this is clear tube number 2. Okay, just you're almost driving without a hammer. But if you'll hand it to me, I'll get it in a second. I'm going to take a couple more shots of this before we get all in. I get the pictures. Alright? Try it in real easy, Houston.
The sounds in space, it's odd to have a hammer or a metal tool and bang it against something and hear absolutely nothing. You can, sound won't travel in a vacuum, so there you are outside and you could be hitting something, no sound at all.
In space, since there's no atmosphere, there's no air, if you bang on something when you're doing your spacewalk, you will not be able to hear that.
And this leads us to the dilemma of our final segment. All modern astronauts, such as Piers Sellers and Mike Massimino, claim to hear absolutely nothing when they're out on the International Space Station in the vacuum, banging away with metal tools and objects, whereas during the Apollo missions, all kinds of sounds have been recorded that should not be possible if they are on the moon in the vacuum of space.
This is Mission Control Houston. We want to welcome you to NASA Television's live coverage from the International Space Station Flight Control Room as we get ready for another spacewalk by the crew of Expedition.
Okay, copy.
Notice the complete silence during this modern EVA at the International Space Station. If the astronauts aren't speaking, you hear dead silence.
And I show the arm is safe. Thank you. Good.
The major difference between the Apollo missions and modern spacewalks, such as you just saw at the International Space Station, is that when the astronauts are working on the space station, out in space, in a true vacuum, when they are not transmitting directly through their mics with their voices, you hear dead silence. In the Apollo missions, you can hear all kinds of sounds. The sound of 2 very hard hammer blows transmitted through Dave's gloves into the suit and to his microphone can be heard between his grunts. And we return to the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal, which more and more begins to look like damage control and misdirection. And here is what they have to say about the Apollo 17 hammering. The last paragraph there at the bottom. What seems likely is that when Gene hits the rock, the hammer rebounds against the palm of the pressurized glove, creating a sound wave in the suit loud enough to be picked up by the microphone at Gene's lips. In brief, the suit acts like a drum. But the suit never acts like a drum at the International Space Station, where we are about to watch an astronaut use a power tool.
All right, buddy, we're going to stop at 20 turns.
Understand, we have a go?
Affirm.
All right, here it comes.
Total, utter silence, which is exactly what you are supposed to get if you are in the vacuum of space, and it is exactly what you get in all modern spacewalks. Now let's return to Apollo 12.
Okay, just the fact you're almost driving without a hammer. But if you hand it to me, I'll get it in a second. I'm going to take a couple more shots of this before we leave. Get all the way in, I get the pictures. All right? Driving in real easy, Houston.
That does not sound like the spacesuit acting like a drum at all. It sounds like a metal hammer striking a metal object repeatedly with authority. Pictured is Alan Bean during Apollo 12 striking a metal core tube into the so-called lunar surface with a metal hammer. This is an interview with Apollo astronauts Alan Bean and Pete Conrad, done by the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal. They are once again taking the position that the sound is coming through the hand and transmitting into the microphones in the helmet. Alan Bean says, "I would have said it wasn't possible," and Pete Conrad responds, "The other guy can't hear it." If the sound is coming through Alan Bean's microphone, then like his voice, it must be transmitted directly into the headset of Pete Conrad, so his statement makes no sense. Alan Bean's statement makes a lot of sense, since it would not have been possible in a vacuum. When Bean says, "I would have said it wasn't possible," he has science on his side. And he also has NASA on his side, at least up until August 19th, 2011. And this brings us to the most important graphic in the film. This is a web page that has been disappeared from the internet by NASA as of August 2011. It was at nasa.gov, running concurrently with the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal between 2009 and September 2011. However, this page, which was created for children, you can see the banner at the top, Lunar Science for Kids. This page directly contradicts the assertions made in the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal concerning the hammering sounds in Apollo 12, 15, and 17. This page talks about the science involved with sound on the moon, and it does so correctly. And that is why NASA has disappeared it from the web. The contradiction between the journal and this page was brought up in the very popular Moon Zoo forum. And that is where I first became aware of the situation. Reader Tom128 pointed out the contradiction between the site for children and the journal. And I went looking for the site for children and could not find it. I then went to my favorite research tool, the Wayback Machine at archive.org, and I was able to find an old version of the page that NASA did not clean up. And whenever I see information go missing from the web, it always starts me thinking, and this was the genesis of the film. At that moment, I became a NASA moon hoax researcher. You've seen the image on the right of the graphic before. That is Alan Bean hammering a core tube during Apollo 12, and this is the sound of such hammering. The graphic is problematic for NASA because of the contradiction to the journal, and the graphic is correct science. And I quote, Sound needs something to travel through to get from one place to another. On the moon, since there is no air, sound cannot travel above the surface. So, there are no sounds on the surface of the moon. When the Apollo astronauts were out on the moon's surface, they could only talk to each other and to mission control by using the radios in their air-filled helmets. Even when the astronaut in the photo to the right hit a metal tube into the ground with a hammer, no sound was made. All of the sounds so far analyzed were made by the astronauts as they were handling tools, but now we are going to analyze some sounds that are made a distance away from the astronauts. So what you just saw appears to be a smoking gun. That scene, which was broadcast live to the world during Apollo 15, shows astronaut James Irwin. He takes this cord or band off of a canister, and those canisters are in the mesa table, which Irwin is standing in front of. He unravels the cord, which has two metallic locks at the end of it, pictured here. They look like bullets. He takes that off, he unravels it, he reaches back with his right hand, and he throws the cord away. Let's take another look at it. So the argument has been made for the hammering that the sound is coming through the glove and it's miraculously getting into the microphones. But we don't have to deal with that argument because James Irwin releases the object and it hits the ship and he's not touching it, and that sound is picked up by the microphone inside the astronaut's helmet. And you can always tell that that's the microphone in play because you will always hear the sound of the suit air supply system in the background whenever the astronaut is transmitting, and you will hear this sound remain on for a split second after the astronaut stops transmitting.
Yeah, you better believe it. Yeah, you better believe it.
Both the outside of the ship and the inside of the ship in the cabin are in the vacuum because the lunar module does not have an air hatch. So when the astronauts leave the lunar module, it is depressurized. Microphones in the lunar module plug into the audio centers. The only voice possibilities are through the use of the headsets. They took off with 6 microphones, 3 Snoopy caps. Each astronaut also had a lightweight headset at launch. While they were on the moon and the suspect audio event took place, they were wearing their Snoopy caps. Communication cables, which are the umbilical cords that the astronauts plugged into while in the lunar module, as you can see from the checklist, were stowed prior to EVA. Also, looking at the same exact checklist, we can see that the lightweight headsets were also stowed prior to EVA. So, there were no live microphones inside the cabin. So now let's take another listen, and we will slow down the audio so you can hear the air supply unit remain on for a split second after the object hits the ship.
Sound.
So yeah, I think the old business. I mean, NASA say that it was transmitted through their fingers, their arms, their body to the atmosphere inside the bubble helmet, and hence to the microphone. And that is debatable. I mean, it could be true, it could not be true. But the key thing about this is what Jet Winter found. When they threw the metal band, I can't remember who it was. Who threw it? Was it Scott? I threw the metal band, and it hit the lunar module and made a sound. Now, nobody's touching it. There's no connection with their microphones. I mean, that is the giveaway for me. The rest of it, I think, is a bit debatable.
Well, yeah, if something flies through the air, hits something, makes a sound, there has to be an atmosphere.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
But I mean, it completely negates the excuse made by NASA that it's transmitted through the body to the microphone inside the helmet. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very strange. It's a very strange story that NASA tells on this, because the only spacesuit that operates like a drum is on the moon. All the spacesuits used on the International Space Station don't have this particular property because there is no sound in the International Space Station. And in fact, quite a lot of the astronauts who've been on the space station say, it's uncanny when you start a drill or some sort of mechanical device. You can see it working, but you can't hear it.
Mm.
But on Apollo, of course, this seems to happen quite frequently. And I think Jet Windsor's film, which is Apollo Hoax Now, explains it very well, because he shows the sound. And also NASA use exactly the same illustration. I think you've got it in your book, Trevor. Same illustration showing them hammering the tube into the lunar surface. They use that illustration on the NASA website to explain to kids how there's no sound in space.
Yeah.
And guess what? 2 years later, they took it down.
Yeah.
But they haven't taken it all way back machine either, have they? So it was found again. So NASA have been caught yet again with their pants around their ankles with no sound.
Yeah,
but another explanation I've heard for
is
go ahead, Trevor.
Throwing the metal band incident. That seals it. You can argue forever about whether it acted as a drum or not. Just don't know. But certainly when it threw the metal band and there's no connection with the astronauts, that for me is the giveaway.
Definitely,
that's true.
What you said about the sound traveling through the suit all the way up to their microphones and stuff, that actually reminded me of one excuse that I had heard from as to why we couldn't hear any noise and stuff. They said that the mic doesn't have much of a range. In fact, I think Bill Anders actually jokingly referred to them as tonsil mics, because they've had to basically hold the thing almost in your mouth to be able to register any sound and stuff. Well, if it has so much trouble getting the sound and stuff, how's it picking up the sound of and then fiddling around with what they're doing on outside the suits? And of course,
it's because magic happens on the moon. You've seen that. The spacesuits are magic. The lunar rover's magic. The cameras are magic. The photographs are magic. The whole story is magic.
Yeah.
They want it to be true.
My guess is I know a little bit about mics, being a musician. You get these omnidirectional mics and directional microphones. So I would have thought NASA would have chosen a directional microphone, like you say, one that would pick up the sound directly in front of them, i.e. the voice of the astronaut. But certainly with the sound of if the same mic in the Snoopy cap is picking up sounds of like the band hitting the lunar module or the banging of a rock or something, then that suggests to me that it's got to be maybe a later addition of an omnidirectional microphone, because supposedly you can hear sounds of the backpack pumping the air and stuff like that as well, which you would have thought you wouldn't have heard that with a directional microphone.
But when the metal band hit the lunar module, there was nobody anywhere near it. So
yeah. I mean,
seals it for me.
Yeah. Again, with that, when you're filming on the moon, you're not going to have a microphone attached to your camera anyway, because logically you'd say, well, why do we need a microphone attached to our camera like a video camera? Because there's no sound on the moon. So it's just a waste of extra technology to go there. But for some reason, you get in the recording or the recorded sound of a clung because this strap hits the lunar module.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Also, if I had the microphone, if I was designing a microphone for the astronauts to use, I wouldn't. If you had too short a range, it could be dangerous, because if it sort of slipped in any way, I know the Snoopy caps are designed to stop it slipping, but if it did, you could be unable to communicate.
Oh, the strange thing is, if they're filming this thing somewhere in Nevada, why did they have a microphone on the camera? In any case,
it's one of these things that one for Gus Grissom's Lemon. yet it's what they used. Apparently they used it, and they got to the moon, and nothing went wrong.
6 times nothing went wrong.
Yeah.
I would like to discuss about the rocks and stuff. That's one of my presentations. Sure. As you know, that I recently completed my geology major, and
congratulations.
Yes, if I play my cards right, I should have finished my astrophysics minor at least. I'll get the results soon enough. Now, one of the things that recently popped up in the thing. Let me just try to screenshot. Let me get this up first of all. This computer still uses Windows 8.1, so I hope to be able to open this PDF up in Firefox. Hang on, Firefox. I'm trying to screenshot. Next one. Oops, that wasn't it. Give me a second. Problem solving.
No, it's mate.
Okay, is it? Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
This is the devil. Okay, can you see my screen now?
No. No.
All right, well, I'll just have to read you the articles and stuff.
Sure.
Basically, recently, it was reported. Hang on, I'm trying to get this thing open up. Come on, reader. I'm doing enough evidence later on. Hang on. Now, let's get this up. Okay. Okay, they recently, Bellucci et al. 2019, they published a paper in the Earth and Planetary Science Letters. It's called Terrestrial Like Zircon and Classed from Apollo 14 Breccia. They reported that this particular rock from Apollo 14 had these key signatures that are characteristic of being from Earth. They reckon that, you know, basically they have no alternative, and they say, okay, this must have come from the Earth. It landed, basically was ejected to the moon during meteorite impacts. Basically, meteorite crashed into the Earth, sent up all this debris, landed on the moon, and was retrieved by the Apollo astronauts, by the Apollo 14 crew. That's basically, yeah. Now that's convenient, isn't it? Well, yeah. That is magic in its own right, because let me put it this way: we have rocks that are supposed to be from the moon. We have meteorites from Mars, meteorites from the asteroids. We even have a meteorite from Mercury. Yet we have no meteorites from Venus. Why do you think that is?
I'm not sure. I mean, I know that there are bits of things fly off into space on impacts. They sometimes land on other planets, but it's quite hard to find these things. In fact, it took them quite a long time to find moon rocks in Antarctica. But
that's not really what I'm talking about right now and stuff. I'm just explaining basically. It can't be because it's so close to the sun, because we have at least one meteorite from Mercury, which is even closer to the sun, and therefore that meteorite would have a much difficult time escaping the sun's gravity well, and yet we've got one of those. It can't be because of the atmosphere, because the atmosphere on Venus is very dense, but the pressures that would have been created during meteorite impacts would have been much greater than the atmospheric pressure on Venus. Maybe it's because Venus is almost the exact same size as the Earth, and therefore has almost the exact same gravity as the Earth. You know, so you know, if it took a space shuttle to launch off the Earth, it'll take a space shuttle to launch off Venus, right? So now they're telling us that we can have rocks from the Earth landing on the moon and being collected by the astronauts. I'm telling you that's a scientific impossibility.
I see. So because if that was the case, then we'd have rocks from Venus on Earth.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Because it is true. I mean, Venus, Earth is the biggest of the inner planets, but Venus, I think, is only 2% smaller. It's slightly smaller, but it's only about 1 or 2%, I think. Which means, it does have a similar gravitational field. So that's an interesting point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I find it very unlikely that any rocks would have come. Any rocks that would have been picked up off the Earth would have just, fallen straight back to the Earth, because it's very doubtful it would have been taken to escape velocity.
Yeah, but of course, escape velocity on Mars and the Moon is much smaller, and Mercury as well.
Exactly.
Similar to Mars.
Would the fact that Venus is closer to the Sun have anything to do with it as well?
No,
Mercury's even closer to the Sun than Venus is. It goes Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. So
yeah,
I think my screen's frozen.
And also, you'd have to be Jarrah, I was saying, you'd have to be. It'd be awfully bad luck if you're on the Moon and you picked up some rock and took it back, and they say, "Oh, you accidentally picked up an Earth meteorite." I thought, "Damn it! Of all the rocks and all the Moon, I had to pick up the
bad
one."
luck, isn't it?
When you consider, like you say, they had to. Wernher von Braun had to go to Antarctica. He managed to find 4 meteors on the ice back. It's like from the Moon, he managed to find 4 lumps of moon rock on the ice. But you had to go all the way to Antarctica where you can actually see them because there's lots of ice.
Saved themselves a whole lot of money, though, wouldn't they? If they'd just gone to Antarctica for a weekend, picked up about 10 moon rocks and brought them back, it would have saved all this money.
Where did it? Marcus, you have a piece of moon rock with you, do you not?
I do. I have a real piece of moon rock.
Now, is that real? Is that definitely real? Looks like a chocolate brownie to me.
This is what I was thinking. It looks very tasty.
It's not. It's a piece of moon rock. How do you know it's a piece of moon rock? I hear you ask. Because I say it is. Rather like the way NASA says they've got 842 pounds of moon rock tucked away in a laboratory somewhere in Houston, which only about half of it, less than half of it, has ever been sent out. Because all these scientists who've been examining moon rock, rather like that, that's what most people would think of as a piece of moon rock, something that's sort of tangible. But when NASA send out a sample of their 842 pounds, which is quite a heap of rock, they send out a few grains of dust about the size of half a sugar lump cube, and scientists meant to examine this.
Well, I saw a tiny. I did see some at the University Museum in Oxford. They've got a piece of moon rock apparently, but it's quite small. It's like about an inch across.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, I wouldn't know. I mean, how would you know? I mean, because Jarrah's the geologist, maybe he can inform us. But how would we know? If I had a piece of rock, like the one Marcus just showed, and someone says it's a piece of moon rock, how can I verify that? Because it doesn't look. I couldn't look at that and say that's a piece of moon rock. I see those sort of lying around everywhere on Earth. I mean, I've seen rocks like that before on the beach and everywhere. So, how do we know?
Well, what people generally use to try to determine, okay, this rock came from here, this rock came from there, is we use the elemental ratios and the isotopic ratios as well to try to determine where it came from. With the Moon, it's a bit of an interesting story because the lunar composition is almost exactly identical to that of terrestrial basalts. We have rocks from volcanoes here on the Earth, and we look at the chemical structure. They have similar proportions of the element silicon, titanium, magnesium, all these different elements. They basically fall within the same ranges, and likewise the mineralogy falls within the same ranges. And well, even the isotopic composition is very similar to the Earth rocks, and so that has led to a leading theory that the Moon was formed by a Mars-sized planet colliding with the Earth and basically picking up all this debris into the space, which then clumped together to form the Moon. And so that's the leading theory. But this theory depends on the rocks being bone dry. And well, it's been throughout the last 50 years, there have been various reports popping up. The earliest reports from the 1970s, Friedman and Agrell et al., they respectively reported up to about 1,000 parts per million of water. Their range they reported was between 150 to 1,500 parts per million of water. They noted as well that these compositions were similar to that of freshly erupted Hawaiian basalts. And both parties, they doubted it was contamination, although that was the leading excuse for any presence of water in these rocks. And well, of course, in addition to the water, they also contain rust. You expose the water to this is I think a very key point as to how we can tell that this couldn't possibly have been a legitimate rim rock, because when rocks first form, the only iron that's in them, it's either going to be metallic iron or ferrous iron, FeO, which is just one iron atom, bonded to the oxygen atom and stuff. What happens if you expose it to water and oxygen for a long time? All that iron starts to rust. The metallic iron and the ferrous iron, they both turn into ferric iron. you know, and which is, in fact, if I can actually get this damn screen sharing working, the Apollo 16 rocks in particular were very notorious for this.
Now, on the subject of water, on the moon. Now, if the moon really is just a piece of the Earth, essentially, that broke off in the distant past because of this impact, it's possible there might be some water with it. And indeed, I've seen reports of water in the form of ice being found on the lunar poles where it's permanently in shade. Now, is it not possible that some of that water actually has got onto the moon and in a way that could become part of the rocks?
Well, the water that they're talking about in the poles is essentially water that was delivered to there via either cometary impacts or from solar winds and stuff like that. You know, some interaction with the hydrogen and whatnot basically creates little traces of water or hydroxyl up there. But the only places where comparable amounts of water have been found on the moon, the largest quantities of water that's been found in the Apollo samples is about 6,000 parts per million of water. The poles, the remote sensing missions, they found up to 3,000 parts per million in the poles. And of course, most recently, we've had what's called the LADDI. It only detected about 500 parts per million underneath the surface, outside the poles.
That sounds rather like the same level of carbon dioxide we got in the atmosphere that everybody's getting so upset about. 400 parts per million. Tiny, minuscule. You can hardly see it.
So there's very little there. I mean, it's like a trace. It's a trace composition of these particular pieces of mineral. So if you see a lump of rock like the one Marcus has got, and it has large amounts of water in it, would that definitely be proof that it couldn't possibly have come from the moon?
Well, surely. It would indicate that it's been in a very earthly environment for a long time. If it's got ferric iron, if it's got these large amounts of water in it and stuff, that's an indication that it's been on Earth for quite a long time. And what else is there? Recently as well, the actually was 2006 when the Smart 1 crashed into the moon. It kicked up all this rock for the scientists to analyze, with the radio telescopes, watching this stuff so they could look at it in the infrared and find out what the moon is made of, because different energies, each element will give off a different energy signature. And so by looking in the infrared, we can find out what the moon is made of. It was reported on the ABC that when the Smart 1 kicked up all this dust, it was reported that the dust had minerals different to what was found during the moonwalks, which is very telling. Much more recently, there's the Chinese. They landed the Chang'e 3 mission on the moon, which they released spectral data from their active particle X-ray spectrometers, and this was 2013, if I recall correctly. At the time, let me just try once more to try to share this thing with you guys.
Yeah. It's interesting that the Chang'e 3 mission is actually 41 years since there's been any landing of any craft on the moon, which is, I don't know what the sci-fi fans from the 60s would say about that, but it's very disappointed. I'm sure they will be.
Okay, I think I got the screen share working. Yes, do you see my screen?
I can't, I can just see a picture still.
Oh, I have to see start sharing. That's the problem. Okay.
Oh, here we go. Yeah, something's happening.
This was the data that the Chinese had released. Right. They had an alpha particle X-ray spectrometer basically used to basically measure the composition of the moon in X-ray fluorescence. And so all these peaks here, these tell you how much of the material there is. And so what I did was I took the liberty of measuring these peaks and basically compiling together my own tables to show what composition these all amount to. I had to do some adjustments because, as you can see, oxygen is not listed in these tables. It's outside the range of the thing, so I had to do the calculations, as to what their responding chemical oxides are. And as you can see, I decided to pitch these against the chemical compositions of the Apollo rocks. As you can see, the Chang'e 3 soil has almost no magnesium.
That's a huge difference, isn't it?
Almost no aluminium. Silicon, almost non-existent, and the rocks are predominantly silicon dioxide from Apollo. Potassium, that's not too bad. It's about within the same range of Apollo 12 and Apollo 14. Calcium, that seems to be the most abundant element in the Chang'e 3 soil. Second most abundant is titanium. Chromium, this is also another interesting thing here because the chromium seems to be a minor element. Right, and so, sorry, a major element. To be a major element, it needs to be greater than 1% by weight. And well, in the Apollo samples, chromium is a minor element, as you can see. The iron, not too much different, although this is considering the ferrous iron only. Usually when you see reports on Apollo rocks, the iron is usually being recalculated into ferrous iron because they just assume, oh, okay, this ferric iron's in there, must be a terrestrial contaminant of some kind. But the strontium and these are now the trace elements. As you can see, the trace elements from Apollo rocks are minor elements of the Chang'e 3 site. So that there is very telling. I don't believe this is basaltic rock because we have no basalts with this wacky composition. Recently, the Chinese, they published their own paper basically saying that we've got, okay, we did find basalt, but the chemical composition is somewhat different. How they managed to get basaltic composition out of this is anyone's guess, but they didn't really elaborate that in their paper. I leave it to them to describe. It looks like they're trying to force the numbers to make it fit to look more, convincing to what we're used to seeing from the quote moon rocks.
Well, this is
still, even with that forcing the numbers, I believe is forcing the numbers, they still acknowledged that, okay, this rock is somewhat different to the Apollo samples.
Very. I mean, this is extraordinarily because I mean, apart from the iron and possibly potassium, the Chang'e 3 data you see from the block graphs you created. Just looking at them for a moment, you can see how different the readouts are from the Apollo samples, which would lead one to wonder. Because remember, the Apollo, I mean, people say, well, the Chang'e missions were in different places. One of them landed on the dark side of the moon. Yeah, maybe, but then the Apollo missions didn't all land in the same place either. If you look at the map where the Apollo missions landed, they landed in quite far, they're quite well spaced from each other at different parts of the moon. So, yeah, this is pretty incriminating. And so
the Apollo sites had, in fact, the Chang'e 3 site was about 1,000 kilometers, I believe, away from the Apollo 15 site. So, by all definition, it should be similar enough to the Apollo 15 geology.
Yeah, well, you see, like when you average it across the entire moon, and of course, all the Apollo samples, there's no really distinct difference. You would expect the Chang'e data to at least resemble that of the Apollo data. I mean, it's this is really quite bizarre. I think people should be asking serious questions about this, Jarrah. They really should. How have you had any success in publishing this data or distributing it among geologists?
Well, as a matter of fact, I shared the data with. I was doing my geology major at the time. I shared the data with one of my teachers, and he was very, very skeptical of the data because he said if it's only 4% silicon, that's not even a rock. That's completely unheard of. The only rocks that have that kind of concentrations of calcium oxide would just be something like limestone, which is a sedimentary rock, and of course that's formed through the dissolving of calcium in igneous rocks. It's formed from alteration processes and stuff. These kinds of processes, they don't happen on the moon where there's no atmosphere or water or anything like that. And so he suggested, why don't you try looking into that a bit more? They should publish their own thing. I had another look at the data and stuff, and how they arrived at this data. It just doesn't make any sense. And just to make sure there was nothing wrong with my calculations, I found a similar spectral data. This one is for the calibration target from Curiosity. I did the same calculations, the same procedure. Yeah. They had what's called a calibration target. You see, to measure, before they actually take measurements of the soil, the Chang'e 3 had this too. They have what's called a calibration target, which was basically a rock of known composition. They have the instrument basically analyze that first, and then they compare it to what they're analyzing out in the field. And so the Chinese claim they had a calibration target, which was supposed to be basalt. Somehow they got similar wacky tables like that, wacky peaks like this, I should say. And so I decided, okay, well, let's try this. Let's see what they've done. They've done all kinds of weird ratios to try to arrive at numbers that are consistent with basalt. And so Just out of curiosity, I did the same calculations that I did, the same methodology that I did on Chang'e 3 on the Curiosity calibration target, and lo and behold, I get data that's consistent with the salt. None of this wacky stuff. Somehow they take all these wacky calculations or wacky ratios and whatnot with their own calibration target, and they somehow get the saltic numbers. There's something really weird about how the Chinese are doing this. Maybe they do it differently in China. Who knows? But
in the calculations or in the examination, did you get a chance to look at the Russian samples that were returned by the Lunokhod craft?
Yes, the Russians, they claim that they found the salt as well. But I think one curious thing with the Russian samples is that none of the Russian samples contain any rust. In fact, if I may find let me just get this thing ready here before I screen share again.
So viewers should note, actually, if you're not familiar, viewers, that we discussed the Chang'e 3. Of course, it's an unmanned craft, and as was the Lunokhod. The Lunokhod was a more primitive version of the Jade Rabbit rover that the Soviet Union sent up in the 60s. So
Soviets had 3 sample return missions. There was the Luna 16, Luna 20, and the Luna 24.
No astronauts were involved. The difference with the Apollo is that allegedly astronauts were involved in picking these things up with their hands. So that's the difference.
And ironically, the Soviets only managed to get back 300 grams of lunar soil on their 2 craft. And when they got them back, the Americans knew that they got them back. And the Russians said, "Hey guys, do you want to compare your samples to our samples and see if they match?" It took 2 years of negotiation before America would release any samples to Russia.
This is worrying because, of course, these rocks are going around the place. Like I said, there's a lump of it in the Oxford University Museum, the Natural History Museum here, and I've seen some in other.
Can you?
Okay, I can see some pictures.
My picture here?
Yeah, some pictures.
Yes, this here is the Apollo 16 sample 66095. As I said before, the Apollo 16 samples in particular, they were quite notorious for their rust content. In fact, you can actually see this reddish stain all over the rock. That there is rust.
Yeah, it does look like rust.
It is rust.
That color.
Right, and none of the Soviet samples contained this rust. In fact, I got this paper here by Bell and Mao. Let me just open it. Adobe Reader goes into a different window altogether, so I'm opening it as in Firefox, so hopefully I don't lose it. So this opening time.
I can hear music, Ben. Is that your Liberace friend upstairs?
Yeah, there's a man who lives in the flat above me. He's got a piano.
I thought you better explaining. We don't add the music for effect.
Sorry, viewers. My viewers know Liberace very well. His name's Alan, but
I heard the music too. I thought there was a crossed wire or something.
It's the guy. Okay, I see something.
Here's what Bell and Mao had to say about comparing the Apollo samples. They were comparing Apollo 16 and Apollo 15 rocks to the Luna 20 samples. They say there is a linear relation between the average iron content and the absorption coefficient of a strong polarized crystal field band at 11250 nanometers in Luna 20 plagioclase, a cell that is reportedly not oxidized or hydrated. However, the iron values of plagioclase crystals from the altered Apollo 15 and 16 samples fall off this line, a factor that may be attributed to significant proportions of ferric iron. And then, as I said before, ferric iron, of course, is the alteration of iron in water and air, and so people they find this rust in there, and they try to find some way to talk around it. Like they said, oh, it must be a terrestrial contaminant. This is what Taylor and Hunter said. I've got Taylor and Hunter's paper here. Here we go. They made a huge list of all the rock samples from Apollo 16, which contained rust. Now I may have to rotate the screen in this one.
I mean, if you get into the realm of contaminants, then this is where then essentially they're putting forward a hypothesis that something that is not from the moon looks like something that is from the moon. In which case, in a sense, that's almost an admission they can't tell one from the other.
There we go. Hang on a second. This is This paper is about all the rocks from Apollo 16 and their rust content that they contain. They've got a huge table somewhere here.
It's amazing the result you can produce when you're paid enough money.
Oh, of course. Well, that's...
of course.
I see a table, yeah.
Yeah, call me.
I have to rotate this one, don't I?
Okay.
I rotate it? Yes.
Whenever money's involved, Alan, Marcus, it pays to be cynical.
Absolutely, yes.
You know, it really does.
But of course, when NASA send out their samples to various universities and scientists, because I've read quite a lot of the reports that these people produced. What very few people realize is that when the sample is sent out, they're sent out in a box marked moon rock. So what are they going to say? They're going to say, this isn't moon rock, this came from Columbia River Basin or the Hawaiian volcanoes. No, they're going to say it came from the moon because they want their money.
Okay, here is the samples in question. These numbers here, they represent... Hang on.
You know, Marcus, like
these numbers here, they represent the sample numbers.
Yeah.
Get it to stop rotating like that. These represent the sample numbers, and these crosses and noughts here, they got 0 for absent. Technical issues. Hang on,
mate. Take your time.
I think it's because there's bandwidth here and it's very delayed. So
yeah, just press it and wait. You have to just press it once and wait.
Press and wait. Well, the point is that these crosses that they got, they indicate the proportions of ferric iron. The single cross. Yes, the single cross means it's present. The double cross means it's the single cross means it's trace. Double cross means it's present, and the triple cross means it's abundant, which means it's very, very rusted. Okay, so I counted them all together. Right, 32 of them had trace amounts, and 30 had it present, and another 20 had abundant ferric iron. That includes this sample that I just showed you here. It also includes Big Muley, which is the largest rock ever collected from the Apollo 6, from any of the Apollo missions, actually.
Well, that's what they say.
Yeah, I know. And so, how are these things supposed to be rusted when there's no air or water on the moon? In fact, I remember there was an episode of I don't really watch the show, but there was an episode of Star Trek once where they find that rusted ute in space. That one of the characters says they first detect the traces of rust, and they say, "How can something rust in space where there's no air?" It's virtually the same thing that applies here, because there's no air or water on the moon. So how are we going to get all these rusted in these rocks?
Same way they got the water on that Apollo 17 flag. They left it out in Arizona overnight, and it gets rusty.
And the orange juice in the camera lens. I think, it's all.
Yeah, the orange juice. There are so many of these anomalies in the Apollo record that you do have to wonder how much quality control they managed to put in.
Well, it was the first thing I would do if I got rock samples back from the moon. Is I'd immediately put them in a sealed container and I'd shut the lid and I would keep it. I'd keep it away from everything else. I'd make sure it was in a specially controlled atmosphere. For this very reason, because it's a scientific sample. You don't want any chemical reactions. You don't want any contaminants. It's like that rock you got, Marcus.
There we go. Yeah,
it's got that has got dust from your office. It's probably got pollen on it. It's probably got skin cells from your hand.
Yes,
that as a scientific specimen. That's now how valuable is it as a proper scientific specimen?
And it's got little zap pits in it as well. It's basically a breccia. It's got different minerals in it.
What are the zap pits exactly? Oh, sorry, Jarrah, I'll come back to you in a moment. Sorry, no, carry on.
Zap pits, I can explain what the zap pits are. The zap pits are supposed to be impacts from micrometeoroids. In fact, that's one of the things that they cited as proof. But you can, if you wanted to fake those, though, you got these particle accelerators, which can. In fact, the NASA Casing actually had a section about this in his book. We never went to the moon. I'll get the page up here now. What did he say? He said. Wow. There we go.
There are supposedly moon rocks still sealed up, according to what Scott Henderson sent through this afternoon to Marcus. Marcus forwarded it on to me.
Yeah.
Which are going to be open this year, I believe, for examination. Supposedly, anyway.
But there has been
But if it's still sealed up, how can these scientists examine it?
Well, I guess they're going to unseal it. They're working out ways, according to the documents I was reading, they're going to work out ways to unseal them, practicing on pre-existing lunar soil samples or something like that, replicating the, because apparently it's sealed up on the moon in a vacuum-like box or something, transported back to Earth, and it's been there for 50 years and hidden in a NASA vault, and they're now going to open it up because they've got newer technology to look at it in much more detail, apparently.
Well, they have those cabinets they use in laboratories, what they called vapor cabinets, whatever they're called, and you put your hands in a hole and there's gloves and things like that. I mean, they could use those.
Yeah, they could, but it appears that they didn't, because there are so many stories of contaminants in the moon rocks. You know, human skins appeared on some of them. Hairs have appeared. Human hairs have appeared. It appears that they really didn't look after it very well. And about 15 years ago, there was a case of a gentleman who walked into the NASA storage site and just wheeled the whole lot back out again. It was all stored in a filing cabinet, and he started putting it out on eBay.
A filing cabinet?
Yeah, in a filing cabinet. Which means that they weren't really stored properly. So... we've already discussed how NASA managed to lose most of their telemetry tapes. They've managed to lose a lot of the blueprints and the plans of the rocket and the rover, and presumably the command centers. So losing a few rocks or storing them badly really sort of follows into the NASA story.
Yeah. Is it also true that there's some of the minerals contain brass, which is a synthetic alloy? Is that true?
Yes. Well, stories have been, or reports have been published saying that it was brass. But of course, brass couldn't possibly exist in its native form without being created by the addition of, iron and tin.
Yeah. There's all kinds of other weird stuff. Like there was that incident in the Netherlands where one of the samples turned out to be fossilized wood.
Oh, yeah. Great fun that was. Well,
yes, I actually interviewed Buzz Aldrin. Not really interviewed. I was at the press conference where he was, the guest of honor for the Australian Geographic Awards ceremony. I asked him a question about it. Everybody else was asking him, what was it like on the moon? What did the Earth look like? What did this look like? What did it feel like? And stuff like that. I asked him, at the time when you're in possession of this rock, were you aware that it was petrified wood, or were you also led to believe that it was a genuine moon rock?
Oh, that's on your channel. You filmed that, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Okay, I finally found the passage from Casey's book. Cool. He writes here, for example, there is a laboratory in Santa Barbara that specializes in extremely high-speed impact studies. They've achieved velocities of 32,000 feet per second with a two-stage projectile system. He's referring to about a light gas gun, you see. Okay, he says, obviously, rock specimens could be exposed to high-speed particles, thus simulating small particle meteoroid bombardments. Now, I like to add to that is that I believe to get an authentic look, they could have used actual micrometeoroids. NASA had a program in the mid-60s called Venus Flytrap. It was basically a rocket. It would basically go up into the stratosphere, open up, literally like a Venus flytrap. It had all these collection packages on the inside of the nose cone, which would allow micrometeoroids to essentially pepper these collection packages. The nose cone would close up again, and it would basically touch back down on the Earth. They also had, high altitude balloons for the same purpose. Obviously, sample the micrometeoroids, use them as projectiles in your light gas gun, and there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Marcus, like, if you wanted to prove this came from the moon, based on what you and Jarrah have just been talking about, would it be possible to prove that came from the moon?
What? Well, this particular rock? I doubt it very much, whether you could prove it came to the moon. I mean, we can always... in fact, one particular way of proving that it came from the moon is if I get arrested by NASA for possessing it.
Yeah.
Because private citizens are not allowed to own pieces of moon rock. And there was a lady, it was a couple of years back, who was arrested by NASA because her husband had a piece of moon rock, because he worked with NASA. He worked in Houston, I think it was. And NASA came along, they set a trap for her, They said that they wanted to come and discuss it, and they set a trap for her, and they arrested her. She was a lady of about 75, almost as old as I am. And they arrested her because she had a piece of moon rock, even though she'd been quite upfront as to where she got it from. It was her husband's. He had died recently. She was trying to work out what to do with it. So that's the way. So, hey guys, if you think this is a piece of moon rock, you better come and arrest me.
You can probably get away with it if you say it's a meteorite, because you're allowed to own meteorites. It's samples from the Apollo missions that they seem to get all touchy about.
This is from the Apollo missions. Look at it. You can tell it's from the Apollo missions. It's a piece of moon rock. Similar to that one in the Rijksmuseum.
Yeah. Anyways, here is the now that I finally got the screen sharing working. Here is the paper that I was talking about earlier. This is by Belushi et al. 2019. It says it's called terrestrial-like zircon in a class from the Apollo 14 breccia. Basically, they're talking about how they came across this breccia. So basically, this zircon that's in the rock, and basically they found it has very terrestrial-like conditions. I'll just scroll down to the conclusion. Usually they give you all you need to know in the conclusions and stuff. They go into very lengthy detail during the actual meat and potatoes of the paper. One of the things they teach you in university, if you're looking up science papers to write a report on, or an assignment on, I should say, basically they tell you, okay, if you want, just read the abstract and the conclusions at the end, so you can get the gist of what they're talking about. And then if you see anything that's worth discussing, go back into the rest of the paper so you can find what they're talking about in more lengthier detail. But here they sum it up towards the end here.
That sounds like the true scientific method to me.
So this is so they have they've done an analysis on this breccia.
Rock from Apollo 14. Yeah, this Apollo 14 breccia has zircons and other minerals and characteristics that are basically very, very Earth-like. In fact, here's the thing: the geochemical data from the Felsic class, the lunar breccia 14321, interpreted, blah blah blah. Similarly calculated pressure. What was it? Here we go. The zircon. Oxycalcobalbatic. You have to be it's very difficult to try to pronounce all these words. And ilmenite in the class record low temperature, oxidized, low fluorine, and even water enriched melt that appears to be unique to the moon, yet common to the Earth. Basically, they're saying that this thing must have come from the Earth. This meteor, basically, they're saying it's an Earth meteorite that landed on the moon.
Of course.
So,
right. This is the one we were talking about, where the Apollo missions had the bad luck just to pick up an Earth meteorite, which, of course, didn't. As you said, there's none from Venus. Right. So that's. So has it occurred to any of the authors of this paper that NASA actually sent them a moon rock? I sent them an Earth rock by mistake.
I don't think so, because these things are specifically labeled. They're all characterized. In fact, when you actually want to collect a rock sample to analyze, you actually have to first write out a peer-reviewed proposal. And I say peer-reviewed, you have to basically have it checked by all the scientific peers to say, okay, this is a good way of studying it, and then basically send that request off to NASA. For them to evaluate it. They then peer-review it themselves. They say the yes or no, and if they say yes, they get the sample that you requested.
So the only alternative to this conclusion, that it's a piece of Earth meteor, is they have to accuse NASA of deliberately sending them a non-moon rock. And that means they'd have to sort of accuse NASA of pulling a fast one.
And then they don't do that because they just accept it unquestioningly. In fact, look at this. They even here in the acknowledgements, they even give thanks to we say, we, the authors, would like to thank the Apollo 14 astronauts for risking their lives to recover the sample studied in this paper here. So that's literally how trusting them.
It was probably part of the golf ball that they managed to lose on the moon.
The golf. They played a game of golf. Yeah. So it's interesting here. We have a situation where they would rather just come up with they always go on about Occam's razor. What's the most likely explanation? That's usually the right one. But they would rather not do that. They'd rather go for a very, very unlikely occurrence, rather than just say, look, guys, this is not a moon rock. You've sent us something else, haven't you? This didn't come from the moon. Because then NASA would say, how dare you? You had a peer-reviewed application process, things like that. So that it just shows the politics here, doesn't it? This is an illustration of the politics involved in Apollo research, in research of this data.
Well, if nobody got to the moon, if no Apollo astronaut ever got to the moon, never got beyond low Earth orbit, NASA would have to come up with something to say that they had some rocks. So where did they go? I mean, was it the stuff that Wernher von Braun went to Antarctica to find in the mid to late 60s? Was it something that came from the Columbia River Basin, which is a volcanic extrusion, or the Deccan Flats in India? There are plenty of places these things would come from. But NASA would have had a real problem if they hadn't got to the moon. How on earth to produce all these rocks? And what seems to be happening now is that more and more stories are coming out which says that these are so similar to, if not identical, to similar rocks on Earth. And have we even looked at every rock on Earth? No, we haven't. So how do we know that they could be totally unique? If they came from the moon, there would be, one would expect, certain physical differences between an Earth rock and a moon rock, which is pretty obvious. I mean, you don't need to be a scientist to know that. What you've got is something which people are being persuaded to believe because the story has to be maintained. If the story is fake in the beginning, then...
Hey, folks. How you doing?
Hi, Andy. Hey, how you
doing? Andy's just come in late.
Marcus, I've just been there.
We're just discussing the moon rocks here at the moment.
Hey, Trevor, do you want to add anything to this discussion on moon rocks?
No, I mean, I'm no expert on any of this. I mean, basically, I would class myself as a journalist. I put all this in words that my neighbour would understand. I mean, that's basically my role.
What we're looking at right now, this is a paper by David McKay et al. From 1994. This is one of the NASA guys, one of the NASA geologists. Okay, they're talking about JSC-1, which was a lunar regolith simulant. I actually owe its successor. I actually owe a whole bucket of JSC-1A. Essentially, this stuff is powdered basaltic. And if you look here, this is the chemical composition table. You can see this is the composition of the JSC-1, and this is the lunar soil. What's this? 1-4. Okay, this is from Apollo 14. Okay, you can see the silicon is the same, or about the same. The titanium is about the same. The aluminium is about the same, and it goes on and on. Obviously, this one doesn't have the ferric iron listed here because they always recalculate it into the ferrous iron. But you can see here, look, it adds up to close to about 10. So 10.7 something. So 10.5 here. That would be close enough if we recalculated all this ferric iron into ferrous iron. That's a little habit they do when they discuss the iron in the rocks. He also...
Basically, it's all fake.
Kay also writes about the mineralogy in somewhere in this here. I can find it.
I don't think it's probably been covered. It probably has. What do you guys make of the huge iron deposit that they found under the moon's surface?
Look.
Oh, yeah.
Same rock. There we go.
There we go. It says here... Here we go. This is about the mineralogy now. It says the minerals in JSC-1, plagioclase, pyroxene, olivine, ilmenite, and chromite are also characteristics of lunar basalts and Maria soils. Figure 5, this one here. The compositional ranges of these lunar minerals generally overlap the ranges of their terrestrial counterparts. There you go.
Does overlap mean it match exactly, or there's
basically it falls within the same ranges of what we'd expect to find in the Earth rocks, in the Earth terrestrial basaltic rocks, I should say. And same deal with the isotopes as well. This one's by let's see, Taylor and Epstein. They reported that the oxygen and the I'll read this whole thing to you. The delta oxygen 18 and delta silicon values in the 6 whole rock samples from the high silicon dioxide lunar rock sample 12013 10. This little 10 here refers to the bit they chipped off. Very uniform. Basically, they say these data are very similar to those obtained from terrestrial basalts, gabbros. Gabbro is basically the coarse equivalent of a basalt. If basalt is fine-grained, whereas gabbro is coarse-grained. And the previously analyzed Apollo 11 lunar rocks and terrestrial rhyolite obsidians from the oceanic areas. This rock, however, is distinctly different from tektites. That's actually disputed. I'll get to that in a bit. But they basically here they're saying that the silicon, the oxygen isotopes are same as the Earth. And what's this one here? This one, This one's the iron.
Strongly
Iron.
suggests it doesn't come from the moon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This one here reports they found a lunar dunite reveals the same iron isotopic composition as the bulk silicate Earth and Moon. They also mention a few other isotopes that are similar. Usually they say the iron isotopes are different, but in this case they found one that's the same as the Earth. And what else do we have?
God.
It's the same as the Earth again.
It gets
Yeah, no,
worse.
and here is the and here is the titanium ones, I believe. Yes, titanium. Here they say, here we present the titanium 50 to titanium 47 ratios in lunar samples. Blah, 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 blah. Here we go. We find that the ratio in the Moon is identical to that of the Earth within about 4 parts per million, which is only one over 150. 100. Blah, blah. I'm slowing my words now. I'm tired. 1 over 150 of the isotopic range documented in meteorites. So, in fact, they got a little picture of it here. You can see the
Basically,
Moon.
really, all this scientific investigations, these moon rocks, if they happen to study a pile of Earth rocks with all these various papers you've read out, you get the same results, wouldn't you?
Yeah, they usually, one of the reasons they claim that it's different, they usually say that, okay, one element may be higher than the other or lower than the other, or the element ratios might be different, but of course in fact, there's a guy by the name of Randy Crocker who has a whole website trying to say, okay, how do we know it's a rock from the moon? Many times I've seen people using this website incorrectly, because this website mostly compares Apollo rocks. He actually compares lunar meteorites, which he says is the same as the Apollo samples. Basically, his site mainly compares moon rocks with either chondrites, which are, no one's ever claimed chondrites are the same as meteorites. They're the most common meteorites, but they're very different to Apollo rocks, and I'll explain why in a bit. And he compares it also to sedimentary rocks, and of course, Apollo rocks are igneous, so obviously they're not going to compare to those. Sedimentary rocks are, of course, alteration products of, weathering and alteration conditions and the like. But, so obviously, many people I've seen them use this website, and they say, oh, well, they're all different from the Earth. Well, therefore they can't be. So, they're comparing apples and oranges there, because this website is comparing moon rocks with sedimentary rocks and chondrites. They seem to make the logical fallacy of applying, okay, the characteristics of sedimentary rocks must be in the characteristics of Earth rocks in general. In fact, that's what one of my critics actually did in a response to me. And it's just, it pisses me off when people misuse this stuff incorrectly.
It's like, I was going to say that NASA, when the Apollo missions happened, this is probably something that NASA anticipated, because they were going to bring back a vast amount of minerals. Marcus, did you say it was, how many pounds was they brought back? How many hundreds of pounds?
842 pounds.
842 pounds of rock were collected from the moon by these Apollo missions, allegedly.
320 kilos.
That's a lot. That's a lot of rock. Now, they must have known that the moment this rock is returned to Earth, scientists from all over the world are going to be begging to look at it. They're going to be desperate to look at it. And they probably anticipated in advance that they're going to need to, presuming that, as I believe, that they actually did not send the rockets to the moon, and therefore did not, the minerals they brought back were not from the moon. They're going to have to explain this. They're going to have to come up with some excuse. Or find some way of fudging the entire process.
Here is the data from Agrell et al. 1970. This was basically about the mineralogy and the composition of the rocks. Okay, here we see the chemical compositions, and they've listed the water here. You can see that it's about 15% by weight water. So that would be about 1,500 parts per million. This set here is about 1,000 parts per million. This is 1,100 parts per million of water. This one's only 500 parts per million of water. These ranges are consistent with that of Earth rocks. In fact, there's another paper here by Friedman et al. Let me open this one up.
Not Stanton.
Oops. Here we go. Friedman, they say here that the water content of the breccia is 150 to 145 parts per million. And they say contamination by earth water is thought to be low. They believe it could have come from solar winds and stuff. That's one. And they also say here that the lunar dust is 810 parts per million. Now, they mention it somewhere in this paper here. Where is it? So they say, here we go. They say it is interesting to note that the water content of the breccias is about equal to that of freshly erupted Hawaiian basalt.
Oh, right. So
could it be argued that there's different theories about how the moon is created? This kind of like whack or double whack theory, where kind of Earth, a meteorite or an asteroid hit Earth, and material kind of went into the atmosphere and formed the moon. Could that be?
We were discussing that earlier. As a matter of fact, this water is actually detrimental to that theory, because any water, two objects colliding together will obviously have the same composition as the material that crashed together and stuff. But any water in that kind of explosion, the intense heat would have vaporized the water. Now, in fact, that's why for the years people were saying, okay, the rocks are bone dry. Well, they always would say, oh, it was contamination or this or that. Well, in 2008, that contamination excuse came into doubt when Alberto Sol published this paper, where their paper concerns these little glass. I'm sure they have a picture of it in here, but no, they don't. Basically, they had these little glass beads from the Apollo 15 mission, which they detected about 46 parts per million of water. And you can see from this paper here, they were expecting to find at least between 260 to 745 parts per million of water. Again, that's within the Earth ranges. This is important because they found water in these little glass beads. And, well, the only way you can get the water inside these little glass beads is if the water was there while the glass was solidifying. So it would be impossible for contaminated water or solar wind water or whatever to get inside these things. And so they, as I said before, they were expecting up to this, but they kind of underestimated what they were expecting. Perry et al., which was one of the scientists on that team, they detected about, where is it? Yeah, load.
I must say, it's dismaying how. Sorry, Joe, I'll let you do this.
There's a big buzz for a second, not sure what happened there, but here they say that they contain up to 615 to 1410 parts per million of water. They found beads and melt rocks from the Apollo 17 and the Apollo 15 and stuff. They find much higher. This water is comparable to what we expect in Earth rocks. The highest concentrations of water that I've seen is in this paper here by Greenwood et al. They they found about here we go. If you look at these, this is the chart. This measures the deuterium to water ratio and stuff. They found up to about 6,000 parts per million of water in these Apollo 12 samples here. I contacted one of the authors on the paper. His name was Taylor, and he said they also found the same portions of water in some Apollo 17 rocks as well. Now, in this paper, they argue that, okay, it must have been delivered there by comets, and they try to make the argument that the the deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen. It's basically heavy hydrogen. And they argue that the deuterium ratio of this of these rocks is more in the range of comets. They argue that the Earth deuterium ratio is outside of that. However, they seem to have underestimated the thing. The same people, Hurry, they reported DH ratios that are in the moon rocks that are identical to Earth rocks. So essentially, it has a much larger range than what they attributed to it.
But then surely we've got this problem right at the center of it all. That the vacuum on the moon, assuming that's where these came from, would eliminate water instantly. It's called outgassing.
Exactly.
And it would just not be measurable. It wouldn't be there. H2O would vanish.
I mean,
the only place on the moon where you can find comparable amounts of water is in the polar region. In fact, that's what I got all these papers from about 10 years ago, let's see, it was Chandrayaan-1, Lunar Prospector. The Lunar Prospector did find some water in the poles as well, but here we go, Cassini and Deep Impact, they all detected huge amounts of water in the polar regions, and that was the only place where they could find the comparable amounts of water.
That's the areas to shoot permanent shadow. There's like a light cap there.
Exactly.
So I was talking, we can use that to make fuel for future space missions with that and things like that. There was all kinds of dreams they were coming up with, like something from Arthur C. Clarke. But I find it very dismaying, especially the Zircon Breccia paper. I think it illustrates something which is quite disturbing, because the believers in Apollo, the NASA defenders, will say, well, this wouldn't work because all this is everything that NASA did is peer review, so that scientists have access to all the data. And if the NASA tried to fake the moon missions, the scientists would be able to see that. But what we see here is an element of groups human psychology. We see tacit compliance, subconscious compliance, when they say, well, we can't. I mean, it must have occurred to them. I mean, anyone who's thinking straight would say, well, look, this is not a moon rock. NASA, and the only way NASA could have lied to just a sec.
There we go.
Yeah, you know that they'd rather come up with some cock and bull story. Oh, it's a meteor that came off the Earth, and the astronauts happened to pick it up by a coincidence of billions to one. They happened to pick up this meteor from the Earth. They'd rather come up with some cock and bull story like that than just say what the common sense is leading them. And this is how they keep secrets, ladies and gentlemen. This is how conspiracies happen, because of this psychology, because of this. I mean, we're dealing with the government, we're dealing with people who employ people like the Tavistock Institute, etc., who know how to manipulate the human mind on an individual and collective level. So
Ben,
don't ever.
David Icke used to say, "Shit data in, shit data out."
Yeah. Oh,
I got some. Go ahead.
Go on in, Jarrah. Yeah, no worries.
I was just going to now let you finish first. What you were going to say?
I was just going to say that it's very obvious to me now, especially from what you've shown me this evening, what you've shown us, that we have an example of this denial. Simply, and it doesn't have to be just one person. It could be all the authors of that paper and everyone else at their institutions in denial, saying, no, it must have been a meteor from the Earth. It must have been. But how unlikely is it was a meteor from the Earth? What are the odds against that? It's pure statistics. Rather than the fact that...
Show me a meteorite that we have from Venus, and then you might be able to make a case that it came from the Earth.
Because the alternative is to accuse NASA. The alternative is to accuse NASA of sending them a fake moon rock. It's an Earth rock, and send them a fake moon rock. That's the alternative. They don't want to do it, even though that's far more likely. They don't want to accuse NASA of lying.
I got something special to show you now. Now, I mentioned when I was showing, which paper was it? It was this the one?
Did NASA
when I was showing that one,
the petrified wood?
Oh, you did, Andy. Sorry, Mike, we did that earlier.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I showed you this paper earlier.
Yes, really frightening bit of wood, that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think Aldrin he told me at the press conference. He said, "Oh, they must have been switched." He says that what happens to the display after we give it to somebody is not our responsibility to keep track of it. Anyways, this paper by Epstein, although they say that the oxygen and the silicon ratios are similar as terrestrial basalts, they make this note here where they say that the oxygen isotope ratios are different to the tektites. Now, tektites this is actually probably an even bigger controversial subject, probably even more controversial than the Apollo moon landing conspiracy movement, because when they got the rocks back from Apollo, there was a huge back and forth about the glass sample, because they found the glass in there was very similar in composition to tektites. What a tektite is is molten glass that has been kicked up into space during meteorite impacts, and basically it goes into space, cools, and then falls back down to the Earth. And so, as a matter of fact, I actually did a whole. Can you still see my screen?
Yeah, I can see like there's a ball. There's like a ball-shaped thing at the bottom, and then
bottom. Yes. This is consider yourself very, very special here, because what I'm showing you now is actually one of my geology assignments. As part of my I did a geology course. Here's actually a diagram showing the how tektite is formed, the generally accepted belief. But when they got the rocks back from Apollo, some of them believed that the glass must have been. They said it was similar in composition to tektites, and so there was a huge back and forth about whether or not tektites actually came from the moon.
So is this, were they saying that there was a tektite that actually didn't fall back to Earth and flew off into space and landed on the moon?
Well, they believe tektites are of lunar origin, and they were either blasted off the moon during either volcanic or meteorite impacts. That's what the tektite lunar origin theory is. And so the two samples in question here were sample 12013 and Apollo 14 sample 14425. Now, I did a whole paper on this thing. Epstein and Taylor, they argue that the oxygen isotope is different. From here, they got these are tektites. Here's the oxygen 18 values. Okay, here are some Apollo samples. They argued that here are some terrestrial rocks, as you can see. They argued that the oxygen-18 values of tektites were outside that of Apollo, but I found one example of a tektite here, and oh, look where it lands. Here's the Apollo rock, so it has the same values and stuff. So evidently the tektites have a range of oxygen isotopes that can fall within the same thing. And so he also argued that the elemental ratios were different, but I found, examples. Here are Apollo 12 samples and Apollo 15, 14 samples, and some unspecified high silica glasses and grants that was reported by Taylor. And so, as you can see, the ranges, they overlap each other. So again, it all adds to this thing. And here's something that happens when it comes to discussing it's difficult for me, obviously, to discuss tektites, without discussing the controversial lunar origin theory of them. At the same time, it's also difficult to discuss the lunar origin theory without explaining, what I call a scientific minority position. And so in this paper, I included this section here where I call it a minority position. I cited my own data from the Chang'e 3, and basically explained, here, for example, here is like I said earlier, the water, how there's no water outside no comparable amounts of water outside the polar regions. And so I was honestly expecting to get marked down for, including this unpopular position in this paper. And you want to know what I got for the paper?
What?
100 out of 100.
Hey, well, there is some hope. There's some hope.
Yeah, I kid you not, right? She sent me the teacher. She sent me the feedback over email. She says, okay, 100 out of 100. And I kid you not, the next time I went into class, she was practically groveling in front of me. Like, oh my God, it was so comprehensive. Look at this. I got like pages and pages of references here.
So is she now a convinced Apollo doubter now?
I don't think she was doubted Apollo and stuff, but it's important to make a case. Yeah, but all the same, that's the thing. You have to make your case when you write your report, and I made my case.
Just to clarify, now you were comparing the tektite mineral content, the chemical composition of the tektite. Are the tektites, the lunar origin tektites, the same as the conventional tektites, which you describe as coming off the Earth and coming back to the Earth? How different are they? Are they the same?
Well, they have the same composition of the rock. In fact, there was a very vocal proponent of this. His name was O'Keefe, and he had published several papers about this. In fact, one of the quotes that he had said about the I'm going to get the picture up again. Here we go. This one here. This paper, this tektite, this is Apollo 14 sample 14425. He was quoted as saying, here's the quote, he said, if 14425 had been found in Antarctica ice shelf instead of from or on the moon, it would be declared a tektite.
Well, but he never says, well, maybe that's what it is. He never actually says that, does he?
Well, he says it is. He says that's what it is. He says tektites must be from the moon.
He says it in the conditional tense, though. I mean, it's kind of a conditional way. But he won't actually.
It leads all back to the thing. We find all these things, and but they're similar to the Earth rocks, and as a matter of fact, there's actually something else I mentioned in this paper that I think. Whoop! Shit, hang on. There we go. Okay, there's another thing as well that is worth mentioning here. A lot of people like to cite the radiation that's in the rocks. I mentioned it here somewhere. Where was it?
Yeah, that should be. I mean, according to some of the reports, these things were electrically charged. These rocks.
Here we go. Here's the section here. I mentioned in this paper here that there's a synchrotron called Saturn. I mentioned here the Saturn synchrotron has accurately created simulated the cosmic ray exposure ages of stony meteorites and iron meteorites of 1.6 million years and 3 million years. Basically, what it does is you put these samples inside this particle accelerator, and over several days at these fluxes here they exposed the samples to 1.6 GeV protons at fluxes of 1.3 by 10 to the 8 protons per square centimeter per second for 12 days, and 5.4 by 10 to the 8 protons per over 6 days. Okay, and I make this point here. If one was to repeat the same experiment on tektites, it would take between 0.93 and 2.91 years to simulate the cosmic rays exposures comparable to to meteorites.
So you can actually, oh right, this is going back to what was in Bill Casing's book, because this is saying effectively you can actually create artificially the exact same effect on the rock that you get naturally from exposure to radiation on the moon.
That's correct. They have these. Casing was, of course, was talking about simulating, dust particles impacting the rocks and stuff. What I'm talking about here is the actual cosmic ray exposure areas.
Right,
people, they argue that they've come from space because they've got all these radiation-induced isotopes in them, and so we can actually simulate that by. I think my screen is frozen.
You are frozen, yeah.
Well, this is again.
There
we go.
Cold in Australia, isn't it?
I got the heater on full blast behind me and stuff, so I'm good. But yeah, so that's the way of simulating the cosmic ray exposure areas, and one of the other things that I think is worth mentioning, in addition to the Earth rocks, there's another class of meteorites or another class of rocks, I should say, that's similar in composition to the Apollo samples. The HED group of meteorites. HED stands for Howardite, Eucrite, and Diogenite. When they got the rock samples back from the moon, supposedly, there was debate as to whether or not the HEDs were lunar meteorites. In fact, there have actually been quite a few cases of lunar meteorites that were originally classed as HEDs and vice versa.
Right, yeah. It's really what we think we should move on from the rocks pretty soon. But,
I would like to make just one last thing about that. Just one last thing about that.
This is very important. This is important stuff. This is really important stuff. Yeah, carry on, Jarrah.
Here's the this is actually my Bible for moon rocks. This was written by Mason and Nelson at the Smithsonian. This is a bit. This only covers Apollos 11 and 12 because it was written in 1970. But they had a whole. This literally has a whole data bank of all kinds of papers to its site. And if you look here at this table here, they compared the chemical compositions of HEDs to the Apollo rocks, and they find similar compositions.
Right.
They've also found similar mineralogy. And what people did to try to explain that, they say, the impactor that hit the Earth to create the moon, they believe that that must have been made of the same stuff as the HED meteorites.
So they're coming up with another explanation. I mean, this is something that's really, as I said, this is like people trying to find for other explanations than the most obvious one. The most obvious one that we have thought of. This is what these people are all doing. I mean, we should move on now.
It's like trying to fit. It's like trying to prove that you can fit a square peg in a round hole. That's literally what it boils down to.
It's people trying to, without any conspiracy. It's all subconscious. They're just trying to escape from the most obvious conclusion. That is, these rocks did not come from the moon, and they've been halved, basically. This is it. And I'd ask any geologists or selenologists, if you want to be pedantic, think about what you just heard on this program. If you're listening, please, or watching, please do think about what you just heard. I want to move on to Trevor now, because I think you've got an interesting story to tell. Is it? I mean, I've not read your book, and I've only just met you this evening. But did you described earlier how you used to believe the Apollo missions were real, and you changed your mind?
Until 2 years ago, yeah.
That's quite unusual, I found. So, could you talk us through that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as I said, it was a reaction to my children who were adamant they never went to the moon, and I believe that they did, and I was trying to find evidence. And that is what this book is about. This is impartial. I express no opinion in this book. I just present the evidence from both sides, from these guys here. But I draw no conclusions in that book. But as a result of writing that, then I realized quite clearly that they didn't go to the moon. So what I've done in the new book, which will be published on the 20th of July, is just concentrate on those aspects which show conclusively that they didn't go. I mean, I don't go into all the elements, the anomalies that I did in the first book. So I concentrate on radiation, on gravity, on the moonscapes, on on the diminished technology, things that clearly show. For example, I mean, I think, didn't I send you a small video that I made?
Yeah, it's about dust falling, the way the dust falls. Yeah.
I mean, there we're witnessing two levels of gravity at the same time at the same place. There's the Earth gravity of the moon dust falling, and then of course the astronaut is simulated to be in moon gravity by a suspended wire. Yeah.
See, this is something that really shouldn't happen. And one thing that is consistent is gravitational fields.
Yeah,
we see this everywhere on Earth. We know that Newton's apple fell at a certain speed and a certain acceleration. Yeah. This doesn't vary anywhere. Everywhere you go on the Earth, it's the same. It doesn't in winter. It's the same as in summer. You know, it's in the leap years.
You can see it clearly in that video. There's a load of extracts from videos which show quite clearly that the moon dust or whatever it is falling quicker than the astronaut, and that's impossible.
It should be up. I mean, like you know about the experiment where they drop the big ball and the small ball and they hit the ground at the same time. Gravitational fields are consistent, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. And if you're in any position where you see gravity behaving irregularly like this, there's some trickery involved. There's some kind of visual effect.
Yeah, I mean, there's an extra force on the astronaut holding him up, and this is the suspension wire.
So you believe that a suspension wire? I mean, Marcus has discussed suspension wire and things like that before. Do you believe the suspension wire accounts for these anomalies?
Oh, clearly, yeah. I mean, there's no other explanation. I mean, if you look at the business of the waving flags, it's been debated. Why the wave, etc. Is it an astronaut touching them, etc., etc. Basically, you can forget all that and just look at the way it swings. Yeah, because it's like at the edge of the. It's a paper by Steve the Chemist. Unfortunately, all his videos have now disappeared off the internet.
Is that the one? I forgot the title of the series, but there was a series of videos looking into this, which has been deleted. They're probably on BitChute or somewhere like that. I'm able to find them. But what they call, what's the title of these videos?
Steve the Chemist is the author. Right. I spoke to him quite a lot, but then suddenly he disappeared. But of course, as I write the book, I make copies of all the videos that I've put in there so I can replace them.
Good idea.
The smoke and mirrors. All that lot.
Smoke and mirrors, that's it. Smoke and mirrors, yeah. That was very interesting.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And you find, I was asking Jarrah if he could find something. One of the things in that smoking mirrors is this clear evidence that they use different frame rates. If the astronaut was very close to the camera, then they were probably only about 10% was slow motion. Because if he's doing things with his hands or his fingers, as they moved away from the camera, then introduced more and more slow motion. And there were two particular videos which showed this very clearly. And they're shown in the smoke and mirrors. I went to get the actual one from NASA, and it's vanished. Well, they both vanished. And
I remember you asking me for that. I remember you asking me for that footage and stuff. I have it somewhere. Sorry, I forgot about that. I've been literally been a slave to university all this time.
Well, I'd like to have it if you have it. But what's
I'll have a look through my archives.
They've replaced these MPEG videos with rail player versions, which have been smoothed out so you don't see the separate stages. See, one of the things that the skeptics have always said, that it was done in slow motion, and they've been looking for a factor to speed it up. NASA were very clever. You can't do this because the frame rate is changing about every second. Yeah, as the astronaut moves around. So it's impossible unless you know the formulas in order to get back to the proper one.
I believe David Percy originally believed it was a half speed, and I showed that it was 67% speed in some cases.
Yeah, but it isn't. It's all different speeds all the way through. It's changing all the time.
I haven't looked at that myself. But
if you find that clip I was asking for, you'll see it quite clearly. As the astronaut moves away, he's slowing down. this was done to enlarge the scene. It makes it look falsely enlarge the size of the stage set. It takes him longer then to move away as they're slowing him down, and they go from about 10% to about 87%. Yeah.
That's of course that shouldn't happen at all, because they had a TV camera. All the motion picture was captured on a TV camera and was transmitted to Earth, where it was supposedly broadcast live, and then transferred to videotape, which got lost and ended up in an auction. It's just lunacy. And also, what I think is also suspicious is the people who, as you mentioned, people disappearing, like you mentioned Steve the chemist. Has he been banned from YouTube, or is he just
vanished? I have no idea, because I only contacted him through his webpage. Well, I can't do that anymore.
If you know anyone who's seriously, if you know anyone who has his contact details, his phone number or something, you need to check he's all right. Because the smoke and mirrors, I mean, the guy who does the narration for the smoke and mirrors is so keen to preserve his identity that you can hardly hear what he's saying, because he disguises his voice. His voice is auto-tuned so much. There's definitely suppression here. There's definitely, you mentioned, I mean, Jarrah, you've mentioned that things go missing. You've mentioned that you've been talking to people and things go missing. This is what you'd expect if they're lying and they don't want people to know about certain things. You find that you ask them for answers and they don't give the answers. You ask them for the original footage and they say, "Oh, we've taped over it. We decided to put the Grand National on it or something." It's exactly what you would expect, because the original data's missing.
Yeah. Well, just a quick little thing. Just one last thing about the rocks and stuff. I mentioned earlier how the what's this paper? This is Greenwood. How they said that the comet water is basically responsible for the water in the Apollo samples because the DH ratio and stuff. I mentioned how the other group, Ferry, they've said that that's wrong, because they say here, as a result of uncertainties in our measurements and correction for the effect of cosmic reswirling degassing, we conclude that geomagnetic water in the lunar interior has a DH ratio that is indistinguishable from terrestrial water.
Oh, indistinguishable from terrestrial. He keeps hearing this again and again and again. All these papers are a long-winded way of saying it's exactly like what you'd expect from samples from the Earth. It's
terrestrial rock. There we go. Simple.
That's it, Marcus. Well, see how much you can get for it on eBay anyway.
Oh, good thinking. Yeah.
But we're going to have to end in a minute, guys, but I just wanted to talk to each of you and ask what you're going to be doing, because of course this is actually a couple of weeks before the moon landing, and I know that Trevor's book is coming out on the 20th, so that is actually the date of the landing. Now, we might have to reconvene afterwards to completely analyse the propaganda, disinformation we are going to see in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I probably haven't seen the worst of it. I'll watch that Apollo mission. I'll watch that Apollo 11 film at the cinema, and maybe we can get back together again in maybe a month's time and have another little chat. But what are you going to be doing on the 50th anniversary, Jarrah? Any plans?
Well, my plans over the next few weeks is to finish my next Moonfaker, which I'm sorry to say is going to be a boycott of Albino Gallipini's disingenuous website after his. In fact, I actually used a clip from our last broadcast in my latest video that I put out. You might have seen it, in which I demonstrated how he has been essentially putting words in Bill Casey's mouth. Gallipini, he went off the deep end a few years ago and started, promoting flat Earth nonsense. It's bad enough that he's essentially destroyed his own credibility, but he's also tried twisting Casey's statements into something to support flat Earth nonsense. One of the things that he kept claiming was, Casey said, "Oh no, I can't do an Italian accent. No rocket can go faster than 5 kilometers per second." Well, that's incorrect. Casey made no such claim, and in fact, if you look at the Fox special, he actually specifically says that the astronauts stayed in Earth orbit for the duration of the time they were supposed to be, going out to the moon. So, and Albino used still clips from this very interview on his so-called tribute site. So he's just lying here. So, out of respect for Casey, my next video will be a boycott of Gallipini's disingenuous website. He's put so many words in Casey's mouth that I honestly wonder if he ever genuinely mourned him. That's something I never thought I would say 3 years ago.
Well, viewers would take note, because viewers often accuse us of agreeing too much. But as you can see, we in the when it comes to the Apollo hoax subject, we do actually disagree quite considerably on many things. So there is controversy within our community. I personally I've actually made a video on the flat Earth, basically just to deconstruct it rationally, because I believe it does need that. And so you'll find that on my channel, just explaining, guess what, guys, the Earth is round and this is why, and this sort of thing. So check out Jarrah's channel, and you may not agree with everything, but please do check it out. It's very interesting. He has a lot of things on there. And again, look at both sides of the controversy. That's what I always say. Now, Trevor, I know what we've already talked about what you're going to be doing. Your book launch. How's you got any plans for that? Are you going to be camping outside NASA's headquarters with the first copy off the press?
They should get a complimentary copy.
Yeah. I mean, these books go with a website. For example, this one, there's 9,000 hours of video on the website, plus about 2,000 documents, and the same for the new book. So there's a website. So as you go through, you're actually directed to a particular chapter and appendix number.
Could you show us the book, the new book, Trevor, again? Could you show us the new book clearly? Just hold it in vision for a bit so we can all see it. And it's called Apollo Moon Hoax by Trevor Weaver.
This is an exclusive, ladies and gentlemen. You're seeing the cover of the upcoming book.
Just so that people, if they're interested, they can see the cover. And
I mean, basically, it's a generation deceived by NASA.
Uh-huh.
You know, what annoys me, this is being taught in schools now as real history.
Mm.
And I think, I think Marcus said this, and I make a quote from Marcus in the book. It just diminishes real technology, real achievement, if you do this. Yeah. But I don't blame the teachers, because they probably believe it.
Well, exactly. They're just repeaters, as David Icke says. You know, they just repeat what they're told. And as Jarrah has demonstrated, geologists do the same thing. It's very, very. Sometimes I find demoralising, quite frankly. But
I had one incident once in which this was actually during a geology excursion. We were measuring, basically doing gravity surveys. We had a gravitometer. We went off campus. We went in separate cars, and one of the classmates was riding with the teacher. She actually mentioned that I was a moon landing doubter, and apparently this teacher, he had actually co-authored papers with Harrison Schmitt, the astronaut geologist. Oh dear! So basically, and literally, we arrived at the site. First thing he says to me, he says, "So you don't like the moon landings, Jarrah?" And he said, "I don't." And I realized, oh my God, she must have mentioned them. And I said, "It's not that I don't like them. I just don't believe they happened." And I kid you not, the whole field trip was just me and him arguing back and forth about the rocks he was citing. I was citing the papers. He was trying to shoot down what I said, and I was counting with all the other papers I cited. He mentioned, we have meteorites that are from the moon, and I say, are these the same meteorites that we think were HED meteorites? And he said, well, was that before we had the rocks? And I say, no, after we had the rocks. And I was naming the actually meteorite numbers and everything. That's honestly. No joke. As soon as we stopped the device, to let it take its measurements, do its magic. Well, okay, here we set it up. Now, by the way, Joe, you do know whether it was this and that and thing, and he just literally would argue me while we were waiting for the data to come in. It was just,
it's one of those moments.
I'll just mention one thing. On this book, I have a website, and I can see exactly where the people are who are reading the book. And constantly, I've had NASA and the CIA in Langley, Virginia. All the time. If you go to the website, it's man-on-the-moon.info, and there's something who's reading. Just click on that, and you'll see the people around the world reading the book.
I expect they watch our videos anyway.
I wouldn't be surprised if our viewers have a similar profile. In which case, get a proper job, guys. And Neil, any plans for the 50th anniversary?
I probably would be interested in seeing some of these films. I've seen the adverts in London, where I've been venturing lately. I mean, obviously, we were trying to set up a little interview actually in front of the lunar module at the Science Museum, but unfortunately, we were thwarted by their media department, who were very suspicious of our motives. I can't think why.
I did tell you guys. I did tell you.
So, but we were bringing extra Baker foil for their lunar module. So, but
I was looking forward to that.
I was. One idea I've got. I'm still sort of pondering the idea of buying a US flag and erecting it in the garden and actually pouring water over it. and then taking shots of it over a period of hours in a good sort of amount of heat, drying off to see if it looks anything like Scott Henderson's discovered shot of the Apollo 17 flag, where it
wasn't the
appears to be
flag
moist.
made of nylon though. I mean,
So-
the flag was made of nylon.
Yeah,
so
I know
would
what you're
show.
saying. I know what you're saying, but the one that was used on Apollo 17 was supposedly taken out of the mission control room at NASA, which was made of cotton, so it came from a different source. It was slightly larger than the rest, apparently. Is that right, Jarrah? Would you know anything about that?
First I've heard about it being made of cotton. All the flags I've heard were made of nylon. The thing that really stands out about the flag to me, of course, is the fact that when the Russians tried to do the same thing on the Mir station, it was quickly destroyed by the micrometeorite environment.
It was, yeah. They found that out when they went to put the new Russian flag up after the fall of the Soviet Union. And so I mean, of course, your video, Jarrah, about the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, it shows the flag, and as you say correctly, that couldn't happen because it would be in little bits. It'd just be tatters. Let's move on to Marcus. Now, I know Marcus and I are going to get together. We plan to get together for Panmo Radio, but what else have you got planned, Marcus?
Right. Well, on Thursday, in 2 days' time, sorry, this is going out after this will have happened, but in 2 days' time from the live recording, I'm going to take part in an Apollo debate.
Oh, they do debate sometimes.
Wow. Sorry?
They do debate us sometimes.
Well, I don't know if the person I'll be debating with is actually very pro-NASA. But he is an astronomer. He's had 30 years experience as an astronomer. So I've got a lot of questions for him. But the idea is that we'll have a debate. I'll present my case, 45 minutes. He'll present his case for 45 minutes, i.e. trying to rubbish me. Then we get 20 minutes to question each other. And then we get the audience questions after that, which seems a bit unfortunate that the audience don't get to question us earlier. So we're doing that on Thursday. That'll be fun. That's up in London at Camden. The Pirates Castle at Camden, which looks great fun. I haven't been there before.
Unfortunately, I'm doing the Panmo show. Otherwise, I'd come and join you. I'd come and.
Well, you should do.
Is that a televised thing, Marcus, or what is it?
It's going to be recorded. It's not being set up specifically as a television event, but it'll be recorded similar to the way you recorded at Dreaming Saucers.
Yeah.
Just one camera. That's all you need to get the information, because you did a good job. Neil did a good job on that one as well.
Well, I'll look at anything about the zigzag production, Marcus.
I haven't heard anything about the transmission date. Yeah, that's the zigzag production. That's what Trevor and I were both interviewed for. It's about 3 or 4 months ago, wasn't it? We were interviewed, and it's supposed to be put up there for somewhere around the anniversary, which will be around the 20th of July. And the HBO Vice people have got back in touch with me again, saying they want to interview me on camera. It'll be about 8 or 10 minutes, which will go into the program. Randy Walsh in Canada is also being interviewed by them. I don't know if Bart is as well. They say it's going to be a sympathetic portrayal. Well, knowing mainstream media, they don't do sympathetic portrayals, so I'm fully expecting to be taken to the cleaners. They're going to have a hell of a job.
They'll try to, Marcus. They will try to. They've always failed.
They will try to, but look, I'm old enough and ugly enough, and I've been around the block enough times to know exactly what to say. Yeah. So I'm not at all worried about that. And then on the 28th, 29th of July, getting together with Neil and doing a presentation to the group in High Wycombe.
High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup. High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup group, the Bricklayers Arms in High Street, Downley, High Wycombe, Bucks. Yeah, Marcus is coming along to do his Apollo Moon presentation. It probably brings Moon Rock too.
Which date is that?
With Moon Rock.
29th.
It's a Monday. Andy.
I know. Cool. I know because unfortunately I won't be able to make it, and I'm very sorry about that. I'll be speaking at the Swansea UFO Network, so I've got to go there instead, which is a pain in the butt.
That's a hell of a way to go to the UFO Network, but never mind.
I've been invited to speak there, so that's a great shame.
Ben, you switch into your Welsh accent when you do that.
Oh, yes, indeed, I do. But I come from Wales originally.
Just one other thing: the Cheltenham Festival of Science had two quite interesting debates. One, they had Rick Armstrong, that's Neil Armstrong's son. He was going to be on a panel with Dallas Campbell, who was going to be questioning presumably about his dad and what he believed his dad had done. There's an interesting point. If you've ever read the book First Man, on which the film was based, by James Hansen, which is a biography, an official biography of Neil Armstrong. His family cooperated with it. But right at the end of the book, it's about 500 or 600 pages. It's a lot of detail. It's a very strange book. It goes into incredible detail about Neil Armstrong's career as a pilot and as a test pilot. But if you wanted to read it from the point of view of getting information about his Apollo time, it's very murky. It hardly covers it in any great detail at all.
You think that'd be the biggest part of the book?
Well, you would, yes. It's about a third of the book, the Apollo stuff. It's all about his family, where he grew up, his parents, who he's very fond of. But he also had a younger brother. He had two sons. Rick was the oldest, and Mark was the youngest. In the acknowledgements of the book, it is said that his second son, Mark, refused to take part in any of the interviews for the book, which I found very strange, a very strange reaction.
Yes, I wonder why that was.
Marcus, have you ever spoken to any of the Grissams?
Sorry?
Have you spoken to any of the Grissom family?
No, I haven't. I've seen the interviews with Scott Grissom, where he basically says NASA murdered my father.
There's
also a series on Discovery Channel at the moment about, I think it's called "Did We Land on the Moon?" And you got three guys. One is an astronaut, one is a scientist, and the other is Mike Barra, who's the skeptic about the Apollo missions. And basically what they do is get Mike Barra to give all the reasons why it never happened. And then these two guys trail around the country proving it did happen.
Oh, it's familiar.
But one interesting sequence, which I saw, I haven't seen the second program, one interesting sequence was talking about Thomas Barron and his report.
The guy got killed on the on the level crossing, isn't
it? Yeah, and they went to the level crossing on which this happened. It doesn't actually still exist. It's just a small road now. But they show the path his car would have taken to be hit by this train. It's almost impossible to avoid seeing a train.
So that's interesting.
And given that the train was owned by NASA as well, you have to wonder.
Didn't the car stall? I thought the car stalled.
Sorry?
I thought the car stalled on the level crossing.
That's the story.
Yeah.
Whether it happened or not, nobody knows. But it was very unlikely that they wouldn't have seen the train. If the car was stalled, they'd have got out of the car.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the coroner said it was suicide, and that was the verdict, wasn't it?
Well, it makes a good story, but it doesn't sound as if Thomas Barron was the suicide type.
And to kill his daughter and his wife.
Yeah.
There's another thing about that story that stands out in my mind as well, as he mentioned, Casey actually published the interview that the testimony that Barron gave to Congress, and he actually specifies where he lives in that testimony. If you actually look up the place where he lived, you find, and the level crossing where he died, you find that it was over water. You know, he had to cross the river essentially to even get to the thing. He was going to commit suicide. Wanted to just drive the car into the lake.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, that's odd, isn't it? Yeah.
There's some very. It's an interesting series of programs. Let's say it's on Discovery Channel. It'll probably pop up on YouTube at some point. But
I'll check it out. Yeah.
It's standard Discovery Channel, quick editing, loud music, short sequences. But the format of the program you're talking about, where they give the information, they go around the country debunking it. It's a familiar type. I've been asked to take part in those kinds of programs myself, and I declined. And as for myself, on the 50th anniversary of the alleged Apollo landing, I know what I'll be doing. Well, firstly, Marcus and I are going to get together and produce another program. We are.
And then I'm going to hopefully see, I'll be examining very closely the mainstream media productions, including the programs that Marcus has just talked about. And it's going to be a lot easier, actually, because Professor Brian Cox has been dumped on us. He's been dumped on Australia this time. So, Jarrah, you're going to have to put up with him, mate. And I tell you what, rather you than me. What a
Jarrah, go along to wherever he's talking and raise some really difficult questions for him. Because I just want to see that smug grin wiped off his face.
We don't want it. That's his response. But it's... Sorry,
I
Trevor.
thought we were having this Paolo Altiviso, or his name is.
He never responded. I messaged him, just didn't come back to me. So
you know, it's really weird how moon landing defenders.
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's freely available online. I mean, I've included it in my new book as an example of how they gloss over and they're very selective in the debunking.
Yes. Yeah.
So it says nothing about any of the things I've got in my new book. It's just the usual nonsense, you know.
It's what you would expect. I mean, the poor quality is a sign of lies and propaganda. And indeed, that's something we're going to be looking at in the next couple of weeks. But this has been a great programme. I'd like to thank all you gentlemen, Neil Geddes-Ward, Trevor Weaver, Marcus Allen and Jarrah White. I'd like to thank all of you for taking part in yet another episode. Oh, sorry, and Andy Chaplin, who has joined us. Who's a
very long.
Who joined us later on.
I got one more guest who would like to say something.
Oh,
let's see.
It's not Neil Armstrong.
Oh my God!
Yeah. I don't know if it'll be out by the time this program comes out, but go see the new Godzilla film. It portrays the radiation better than NASA does.
Oh, right. That's another thing you can look at. Well, thank you very much, Godzilla. Much appreciated.
That's probably a sequence from Todd Miller's previous film to Apollo 11. It was called Dinosaur 13.
Fun.
It's actually the 98 version of Godzilla.
Well, I hope we will all get together again, because we'll probably have to do another program after and debrief what's happening over the next month. But if listeners, viewers rather, want to know anything about these four gentlemen, you can find their links in the description box. There's Trevor Weaver there, the link to his book page, Nexus magazine, which Marcus publishes, Jarrah White's Moonfaker. Oh, there you see it. It's behind Trevor, Nexus magazine. The Moonfaker YouTube channel, which Jarrah White is there. And
the channel is White Jarrah. White
Jarrah, yeah. He's one of these few people who managed to stay on YouTube and not been kicked off for now. So good luck with that, Jarrah. And myself, the Hospital Porters Against the New World Order, and you could find my own videos and other things as well. And Neil Geddes-Ward, he has his own website. Check that out. And Andy, the Paranormal Peep Show, check that out as well on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Andy and I produce together once a month.
And check that out too. So I want to say a big thank you to everyone who's taken part, all you guys who's taken part. Of course, everyone who has watched, spread the word, watch the mainstream media lies, and you'll be able to decipher them. And this program will help you unpick them and find a way to the truth. This 50th anniversary is a unique opportunity, an informational choke point through which we all have to pass, and hopefully what comes out the other side will be different to what went in. Thank you very much, everybody, and good night.
Thanks, Ben. Good night.
See you around.